The story began in the year 2025 AD. A sudden meteor shower carrying an unknown virus struck Earth, causing over 80% of the world's population to transform into monsters that preyed on whomever they pleased. Among the survivors, a tiny fraction awakened powerful abilities and became the new rulers of the world. Amidst the chaos, the scene shifted to a street filled with monsters. Inside a building beside the street, a loud bang echoed. A man was seen tied up, bruises covering his entire body. Two men stood in front of him, grinning, while their boss lounged on a sofa with two beautiful girls. The two men demanded the tied-up man to reveal if anyone else had attempted to escape with him. The man stammered in response. The boss, surrounded by the two women, spoke up. He said he provided food and drinks for the others, yet they dared to steal and flee. The two women mocked the tied-up man. One of them remarked that the rats were greedy. The other added that he deserved to die. At that moment, the tied-up man coughed up blood and growled in pain. He glared at the boss and said he would rather die than live under the hands of a demon like him. Gritting his teeth, he confessed his regret in trusting Anna, saying the plan wouldn't have been exposed so early otherwise. One of the girls clinging to the boss, revealed to be Anna, appeared slightly shocked. Anna approached the protagonist and slapped him hard. She exclaimed that she now belonged to the Lord and questioned if he was worthy of calling her by name. The protagonist, enduring everything, responded that if he had known, he wouldn't have saved her at the start of the apocalypse. Anna mocked him again, saying he was still being naive. At that moment, the boss walked towards the protagonist. Anna asked the boss why he was bothering with the trash. The boss rotated his shoulders and laughed, stating that trash needed to be discarded. His eyes turned red, his pupils glowing as he wore a menacing expression. He declared that in the apocalypse, trash must be thrown away. He then shouted that supernaturals were the true masters and launched a powerful punch at the protagonist. The blow caused blood to spurt from the protagonist's mouth as he was hurled across the room, crashing through wooden planks and falling outside the building. Lying helplessly on the ground, still tied, the protagonist heard Anna suggest to the boss that he should use his power to drain him. The boss replied that the trash wasn't worth his time and said it would serve as a reward for the zombies below. Zombie-like creatures began approaching the protagonist, ready to devour him. Anna and the boss's mocking laughter filled the air. Even in his final moments, the protagonist stared menacingly at the boss and Anna, thinking that he would definitely kill all the supernatural. The light began to fade. Suddenly, the scene changed to a building where someone was beating the protagonist, shouting a warning. The protagonist took the punch, surrounded by a group of bullies. Their leader warned him to stay away from Anna or face broken legs next time. Falling to the ground, the protagonist was confused, wondering what was happening. He questioned if he had not been killed by the mutants. He noticed that he had no wounds, no hunger pangs, despite having starved for months previously. Something felt different. Just then, a bully confronted him, asking how he dared to ignore him and whether he wanted to be taught a lesson. The bully mentioned being the boss of Nanjing University, but the protagonist remained absorbed in his confusion. Then the protagonist's expression turned serious. He asked the bully if he was from Changsu Dong's group. The bully grabbed his shirt, lifted him, and smugly dismissed the name, declaring himself the boss of Nanjing University. The protagonist remained expressionless. Suddenly, he kneed the bully in the gut. A lackey shouted that the protagonist was still resisting and ordered others to destroy him. The group of bullies charged at him, yelling threats. The protagonist, calm and silent, assessed the situation. He noted numerous openings. As the first attacker struck, the protagonist kicked him in the stomach. He dodged another punch and continued, thinking that none of them seemed to have experienced the apocalypse. He spun and landed a kick to another's neck, noting that this level of combat was trivial. In seconds, the protagonist had incapacitated the bullies. Two remaining bullies questioned what had just happened. One with long hair asked if they should retreat. The other refused, worrying that if the protagonist escaped, they wouldn't survive. They coordinated an attack, one from the left and one from the right. The long-haired bully charged with a knife, but the protagonist blocked the attack, glared, and threw him to the ground. Suddenly, another bully came from behind with a baseball bat, but the protagonist swiftly grabbed his hand, disarmed him, and punched him in the stomach. He then caught the knife that had been flung into the air during the scuffle. Pointing the weapon at the bully leader, the protagonist coldly said, "Scram or die." The bully leader, now on the ground, whimpered that he would leave, mucus dripping from his nose. The protagonist responded indifferently and sighed. As he looked down, the bully leader mistook it for an opening and tried to stab him. In the next moment, blood splattered, not the protagonist's but the bully leader's and his lackey's. The blood-soaked bat dropped to the ground. The protagonist had defeated everyone in the bathroom. He wondered if he was dreaming, or if this was his life flashing before his eyes. Then he took out his phone. The protagonist switched on his phone and was immediately shocked by what he saw. The date displayed was May 15, 2025, and the time was 9:33 a.m. Upon seeing this, he appeared confused. He thought to himself that he had been reborn 1 week before the apocalypse. He questioned inwardly whether it could be true. To confirm his suspicion, he began to run, thinking that he had to go check it out. When he looked out of the window, the environment outside appeared peaceful. As he observed the view, he thought that the outside world was still the same as it had been before the apocalypse. He smiled and thought that he hadn't expected this outcome. He concluded that he had indeed been reborn 1 week before the apocalypse. Now standing smugly, he thought that before doing anything else, he needed to gather enough supplies. He realized that with the apocalypse approaching, even surviving would be difficult without preparation. There was a resolute look in his eyes as he continued to reflect that only by correcting his past mistakes could he redeem himself. At that very moment, something unexpected occurred. A ding sound echoed around him, and a system panel appeared stating "Host found." He looked at the system panel, a bit startled. The panel displayed that the evolution system had automatically bound itself to him. It showed his current stats: evolution level, 1 evolution percentage, 0 HP, 99/99 strength, 7 agility, 8 defense, 7 powers, none system bound. After reading this, he questioned whether this was the system. The system continued its explanation. The panel revealed that it could absorb external energy to help the host evolve. It claimed to allow the host to break through the limits of the species. He began to reminisce and questioned what that meant. He wondered if it was possible for him to evolve into an immortal. The system panel confirmed that it could be understood in that way, and added that it could also convert the energy collected by the host into a superpower. It reminded him that the amount of superpower energy converted would be large. At that moment, he noticed the building's electric circuit and wondered aloud what kind of energy could be absorbed. He approached the circuit and thought to himself that he needed to test whether the system was genuine. He placed his hand on the electric circuit, and electricity began crackling around it. Suddenly, the entire building's lights went out. People in the building began to wonder what had happened. The power outage puzzled everyone, and darkness filled the area. 2 students were seen running, one exclaiming that there would be no more classes, while the other remarked that the power outage meant freedom from school. At that moment, the protagonist was seen, enveloped in electricity, running at an incredible speed and passing between the 2 students. The students who had just been enjoying their early break were left in awe, their clothes and books scattered due to the sheer velocity of the protagonist. They questioned aloud what had just happened, unable to see who or what had passed them. The protagonist descended the stairs, striking a heroic pose. He was surrounded by a blue electricity-like aura, and his eyes gleamed with blue energy. Looking at himself, he remarked with satisfaction that he could indeed absorb and use energy. At that moment, the system panel reappeared with a reminder. Powers could not be used if energy was exhausted. He responded by asking what his current level was. The system panel displayed again, and in the evolution profile, the percentage had changed from 0% to 2%. His strength had increased from 7 to 8. Agility and defense had also seen improvements. Upon seeing his stats, he thought that he had absorbed all the electricity in the school. However, he wondered whether the evolution rate from that energy conversion was too low. The system panel explained that electricity was considered a low-level energy. It informed him that to quickly gain more evolution, he needed to absorb supernatural energy. Reading this, he internalized the message. He then remembered that it would take another week for supernatural energy to appear. He thought that reaching level 2 wouldn't be easy. At that moment, a system notification appeared stating there were 168 hours remaining until the apocalypse began. A survival preparation task had been unlocked. The task required him to collect enough food, water, and weapons within 3 days. The location of the supplies could be found by accessing the system map. A system panel then appeared, announcing that the mission reward would be the activation of system space. A dimensional cube-like structure materialized before him. He questioned what the system space was. The system panel explained that the space could store any object the host touched. It reminded him that living beings could only be stored with their consent. He realized that he could store anything non-living in the system space. However, if he wished to store a living being, consent from that being was required. Looking at the dimensional cube, he commented that between the guide map and system space, the system had quite a few functions. Another panel appeared, indicating that the supply locations were now visible on the map. It recommended that he follow the guide. A map appeared before him, showing the supply locations. Looking at the map, he recognized a place and thought to himself that he knew where it was. He laughed softly, thinking that he was truly blessed by God in this life. His expression then turned serious as he resolved that this time, he would make someone pay. He vowed not to repeat the mistakes of the past, and an evil smirk appeared on his face. The protagonist stood, thinking to himself that if he remembered correctly, this should be the place. He had arrived at the location marked on the system map. The place appeared to be stocked with many supplies, food, water, and various essentials. He entered the shop and a voice echoed from the speaker welcoming him. He noted that there were still about 100 hours left until the apocalypse began. Smiling as he looked at the shelves filled with food and water, he recalled the system's mission to collect enough supplies, drinking water, and weapons within 3 days to prepare for the apocalypse. At that moment, he activated his system space ability, instantly absorbing all the food on the shelves into it. Whistling and acting nonchalant, he slowly walked around the shop, casually collecting all the supplies. The system panel appeared, indicating that the mission completion progress was at 0.6%. After reading this, he felt frustrated and thought to himself that it was too slow. He questioned how long the mission would take. A passerby in the shop noticed him shouting to himself. Inwardly, the protagonist sighed, thinking whatever. He reminded himself that he hadn't come for these superficial supplies anyway. He then thought of Chang Su-dong. Looking toward a door at the back of the shop, he opened it, thinking that if he took all the hidden goods there, he might be able to complete the mission. Upon opening the door, he noticed a hallway guarded by two men. He began walking down the hallway. The two men became alert. One, a bald man, asked him who he was. The other said that he couldn't pass through there. Without responding, the protagonist activated his electricity power. The two men, who looked like gangsters with cigarettes in their mouths, cracked their knuckles and approached him. One of them called out, demanding an answer. The other insulted him, calling him a deaf brat. In an instant, the protagonist bypassed and electrocuted both men using his powers. The system panel then issued a reminder that energy storage was below 5%. The two men lay unconscious on the ground as the protagonist stood enveloped in his electrical aura. He approached the door they had been guarding and opened it slightly. A bright light spilled out from the room beyond, revealing a casino. He looked around the casino. Descending the stairs, he observed everything around him. Suddenly, a girl called out to him, addressing him as Big Brother. He turned to look at her. She asked why he was there and warned that something was wrong with the place. Clinging to him and holding his hand, she seemed frightened. Looking at her, he wondered why she was there. With a disgusted expression, he questioned to himself how he had still managed to meet her there. He wondered if it was really that hard to sneak into the basement quietly. The girl continued, pleading for him to leave quickly because it was dangerous. She explained that her classmate had tricked her into playing cards, and she had lost over 200,000 yuan in just 3 rounds. Now they wouldn't let her leave. Shrugging her off, the protagonist looked aside, thinking that he didn't want to hear her stories. Just then, a man approached, addressing him as a little brat and asking if he was trying to be a hero who saves the beauty. Wearing a black suit and glasses, the man told him to repay the 200,000 yuan if he wanted to act heroic. The girl called out to him. The protagonist, with a serious look, turned his attention to the man. In the background, a man smoking a cigar observed everything. The girl continued, asking the protagonist if he could lend her some money first, saying that they had promised to let her go if she repaid the debt. He smiled as she spoke. At that moment, she provocatively rubbed her chest against his hand, calling out his name. But the protagonist quickly took her hand and pushed it away, saying that he didn't involve himself in other people's business. He excused himself to the toilet, telling them to enjoy themselves. The girl stood in awe. The man in the black suit laughed, mocking her, asking if she hadn't claimed she could get that bootlicker to pay off her debt. He noted that the protagonist hadn't even dared to speak to him, suggesting that there was no way to make money off him. The girl covered her face with her hands, looking sad, but a moment later she made an arrogantly unimpressed face, saying that he wasn't like that originally. She concluded that she must not have been charming enough. Then the man who had been observing, the one smoking the cigar, appeared and stated that they had just been teasing. The girl addressed him as Big Brother Zhao. Continuing to smoke, Zhao noted that something was off about a student suddenly appearing there. He instructed someone to keep an eye on the protagonist. The black-suited man acknowledged the order. Zhao wondered to himself how the brat had given off the vibe of someone who had killed before. He questioned if it had just been his imagination. Meanwhile, the protagonist was in the bathroom. 2 black-suited men entered looking for him. Hiding, he thought to himself that, as expected, he had become a target. He cursed, blaming Anna for the trouble. It was then revealed that the girl was Anna. He recalled Zhao Yujin, also known as Venom Snake, one of the 4 kings under Chang Su-dong. Despite his appearance, Zhao was smart and served as a military advisor to Chang Su-dong. The protagonist thought what a cautious man Zhao was for sending people to watch him. The 2 men began checking each toilet. One of them wondered why the boss was so worried about a student. The other explained that the boss was known for his caution, which had helped him rise to power. Hiding in one of the toilets, the protagonist observed the men from above. He realized his remaining power was only enough for 1 strike. Then he suddenly lunged out, using his electricity power to attack. Moments later, both men were electrocuted and lay unconscious. The protagonist smugly thought that the battle had to be resolved quickly. He dragged the unconscious bodies into a room, thinking that now he could go to the basement quietly. But just then, someone pointed a gun at his forehead, saying that what Boss Zhao had said was true. The protagonist was startled and shocked as he noticed the man pointing the weapon at him. The man warned that trouble had found him. The scene then shifted to outside the casino. Everyone in the casino had heard a gunshot. A waitress asked if that had been a gunshot, and everyone appeared slightly scared. The commentator in the casino addressed the people, urging them to remain calm. He explained that their establishment had encountered an emergency and would be temporarily closed. He then instructed everyone to leave through the front door. Everyone in the casino panicked. One of the guests asked what that meant. People began murmuring among themselves. Someone expressed disappointment, while another complained that they hadn't had enough fun yet. Someone else cursed, stating they had just won some money. The commentator silently observed all the murmuring and dissatisfaction spreading among the customers. Then he turned to Zhao and informed him that the place had been cleaned. Zhao, while smoking a cigar, responded by noting that something was wrong with the guy if he had started fighting. He added that fortunately, he had an extra trick up his sleeve. He was referring to the protagonist. Zhao went on to say that although he trusted Po Jun's methods, it would be best to leave the guy alive. Zhao explained that he wanted to ask the man where he came from, clearly referring to the protagonist. The scene shifted to the protagonist, who had just dodged a bullet fired by a man pointing a gun at him. The man ordered the protagonist to turn around and hold up his hands. He warned him not to try anything or he'd get a headshot. Smoke was seen coming from the man's gun. The protagonist, staring at the man, thought to himself that the face and the voice seemed familiar. He believed it was Po-jun. A flashback revealed a moment from the protagonist's past. He had been kneeling on the ground, growling and saying that he had given all the food to Anna and was now so hungry that his stomach hurt. Just then, a man had entered, prompting the protagonist to ask who it was. The man had tossed a bag of food toward him, saying, "Here you go, don't starve to death." The protagonist had asked who he was. The man replied that he was Po-jun and told the protagonist that he would be following him to collect supplies from then on. Back in the present, the protagonist looked at the man in front of him and thought that he had survived back then, all thanks to him. He hadn't expected they would meet again like this. Po-jun, still pointing his gun, asked why the protagonist was still standing there. He told him to turn around quickly. The protagonist complied, raising his hands. Looking back, he said it was a misunderstanding and that he had just gotten lost on the way from the toilet. Po-jun coldly responded that he was responsible for making a hole in the protagonist's head and told him to save the excuses for Big Brother Zhao. As the protagonist began walking with his hands up, Po-jun followed behind him, still pointing the gun. At that moment, the protagonist noticed something. It was the building's electrical circuit. He looked at it and thought of a switch. An idea sparked in his mind. He placed his hand on the switch and thought that Po-jun was still as unlucky as ever. Po-jun, noticing the protagonist's actions, began to wonder what he was doing. The protagonist started absorbing all the electricity from the building. Once the electricity was absorbed, the entire building experienced a power outage. Zhao's men questioned what was going on, wondering if it was a power failure. Zhao, lighting his cigar, listened as one of his lackeys asked if they should alert Po-jun to take a look. Zhao replied no, instructing them to let Po-jun handle the situation. He ordered them to fix the circuit first. The lackey responded affirmatively. Zhao, still smoking, instructed the others to guard the gate to prevent sneak attacks. He remarked that the boy was probably just bait. It was clear he was referring to the protagonist. The lackeys confirmed their understanding. The scene shifted to the fight between the protagonist and Po-jun. Po-jun fired bullets, but the protagonist swiftly dodged them using his electrical powers. Po-jun was shocked by the protagonist's movements and questioned if he was even human. The protagonist, enveloped in electrical energy, dashed toward Po-jun. Po-jun had a hidden knife up his sleeve. He pulled it out and attempted to attack the protagonist from behind. The protagonist noticed the incoming attack, dodged it, and remarked that it had been a close call. He asked if Po-jun was trying to stab him to death. The protagonist continued, noting that as expected, Po-jun still had a removable dagger hidden in his left arm. Po-jun adjusted his glasses and wondered how the boy knew so much about him. The protagonist, glaring at Po-jun, thought that Zhao must have sent someone to check after the gunshot and that now was not the time to reminisce. Po-jun readied himself in an attacking stance, gun in one hand and dagger in the other. He noted that the strange electrical current had returned. He was referring to the protagonist, who vanished from sight and reappeared behind him. Po-jun, still processing how the protagonist had moved, turned with his dagger ready, demanding that he stop with the tricks. But the protagonist stopped Po-jun's hand holding the dagger. Apologizing, he electrocuted Po-jun using the power he had absorbed from the building, causing him to scream in pain. Just then, the protagonist noticed a spark in the gas pipe. A huge explosion followed, destroying the area. Amid the blast, the protagonist scoffed and protected Po-jun, wondering what was happening. He questioned if his electricity had triggered the explosion by reaching the gas pipeline. He realized that even after absorbing all the casino's electricity, the energy was not infinite. He lamented that he had wanted to save it but had nearly run out while avoiding the explosion. At that moment, the protagonist noticed a pathway below. He thought it was an unexpected benefit and that there seemed to be more than one way to the basement. He then noticed Po-jun coughing among the debris. Po-jun, lying on the ground, asked if the explosion had been the protagonist's doing. He questioned why the protagonist hadn't killed him and why he had saved him. Po-jun asked who the protagonist was. The protagonist remained silent, saying nothing. But Po-jun continued, offering some advice. He said the protagonist's little tricks were still far inferior to someone else's. Po-jun revealed that the boss behind the place was Chang, but before he could finish, the protagonist electrocuted him again, revealing his skeleton. "Bro got electrocuted again. Just give up, my man." Po-jun growled in pain. The protagonist commented that, as expected of the former captain of the Wolf Warriors, he had managed to stay awake even after that level of shock. But the protagonist knew he couldn't waste any more time on Po-jun. He descended another pathway to the basement, saying that there was no use telling him about Chang Su-dong. Soon he would be a dead man. The scene returned to the casino. Zhao's lackeys informed him that a pipe had exploded in the back corridor. Zhao asked where Po-jun was and whether he had been there. They replied that Po-jun was unconscious on the ground. Hearing that, Zhao began thinking deeply. Just then, Anna commented on the loud noise, saying it had scared her so much that her waist twisted. Zhao slapped Anna. She asked what that was for. Zhao, grabbing her face, accused her of being close to the man who had defeated Master Chang's best fighter. He asked if she thought he was a fool. Zhao instructed two of his men to tie her up. Anna now appeared worried. She pleaded, admitting she had been wrong and insisting that she didn't know anything. She claimed not to be close to the guy and kept calling out to Zhao. Zhao ignored her pleas and told his men to follow him. Two men stepped forward, ready to restrain her. One of Zhao's lackeys asked where they were going, pointing out that the explosion had occurred in the toilet. Zhao, puffing on his cigar, said that the kid's target must be the repository. the scene shifted again. The protagonist was now standing in front of a big door. The protagonist was seen kicking the door open and stepping into the repository, making his way down the stairs. He questioned aloud whether this was the so-called underground warehouse. He remarked on its vastness, calling it an underground fortress. He observed that there were many supplies and drums stored inside. He noted that there were emergency rations, water, clothing, solar cells, and even an armor suit. He then wondered aloud what Chang Su-dong was planning with all this. He considered it simply absurd. At that moment, the protagonist used his system space ability to absorb all the supplies, feeling pleased about it. The system panel appeared, showing the mission completion progress at 25%. Soon after, it increased to 40%, then to 77%. As the progress increased rapidly, the protagonist laughed and called it an amazing harvest. He encouraged himself to take everything. Just then, he noticed something sitting on a table. As he approached, he pondered whether it was a power stone that could awaken supernatural abilities. He questioned why such an item, which should only appear after the apocalypse, was here already. He picked it up. Examining it closely, looking at the stone, he contemplated that Chang Su-dong's preparation in the bunker seemed aimed at surviving an apocalypse. He wondered if it was mere coincidence or if there was some unknown secret before his rebirth. He appeared deeply lost in thought. Suddenly, his expression turned maniacal as he decided that as long as he could absorb the stone's energy, he could become a supernatural being before anyone else. Just then, the system panel appeared, reminding him that due to having a system, he couldn't actively absorb power stones. Dumbfounded, he accepted this, albeit reluctantly. He cursed the system inwardly, angry at its limitations. He decided to store the power stone in his space and study it later. A ding sounded, and the system panel notified him that the mission progress had reached 100%. Immediately following, another panel appeared congratulating him for completing the Apocalypse startup mission. He braced himself and questioned if adding the power stone had caused the mission to finish instantly. Then the system panel announced that rewards were being drawn. Soon after, a reward titled Energy Conversion appeared. The system congratulated him for gaining the superpower energy conversion. Looking blankly at the panel, he repeated the name of the power. He questioned whether it differed from absorbing energy directly. He was already capable of absorbing any type of energy, still he wondered if this new ability had distinct features. The system provided an explanation, stating that energy conversion could transform energy from an object into energy usable by the host, on a 1-to-1 ratio. There would be no energy loss. Hearing this, he smacked his hand and exclaimed that this was like a plus version. The system confirmed that he could understand it that way if he wished. Even though the mission was over, the protagonist considered searching the other rooms. Just then, someone called out to him. He turned around and saw Zhao and his lackeys pointing guns at him. Zhao taunted him, calling him a pesky little mouse cornered in a storage room. Zhao ordered his men to get rid of him, and they began firing. The protagonist managed to dodge all the bullets. One of Zhao's men reported that the area was clear and there was no one else. Zhao reacted in shock. He noticed the supplies were gone, despite the exits being blocked and the surrounding walls remaining intact. He instructed his men to stay alert and not let the protagonist escape. But inwardly, Zhao wondered how the protagonist had managed to remove everything so fast. He speculated whether the protagonist was also one of those types. The protagonist took cover behind a container while his men continued firing. The protagonist blamed himself for becoming overconfident. He realized that absorbing all the supplies had drained a lot of his energy. He hadn't expected Zhao to arrive so soon. He assessed the situation as dire. He glanced at Zhao's men and acknowledged their strong firepower. Fortunately, the bunker had a shooting blind spot. He noted that he still had a little energy left and that if they approached, he might have a chance. At that moment, a door behind him opened and Zhao's men entered. One of them pointed and said the protagonist was there. Looking at them, he muttered that of course they would take a detour. He cursed upon realizing there was a door there. Instantly, he stood up, started running, and used his electrical powers. Thinking that he had no other choice, he braced himself for a fight. He resolved to do his best. Zhao's lackeys were shocked by his speed and yelled for him to die. Just then, a slit appeared on his hand. Blood oozed out and then, astonishingly, the hand transformed. The split morphed into a mouth. The system voice echoed, announcing that evolution conversion activated. The protagonist spun midair and landed heroically in front of Zhao's men. The lackeys pointed their guns at him but were speechless. They murmured amongst themselves when asked if they had hit him. Another questioned what just happened. The protagonist's expression grew serious. The system voice echoed again, stating energy conversion completed. The protagonist kicked one of the lackeys in the face, destroying his gun, and with the same move dismantled another lackey and his weapon. Gun pieces scattered everywhere. He thought to himself that this attack was called bullet kick. He marveled that he had done it. The potential energy of the bullet had indeed been converted. He now pondered how to undo the change. He wondered aloud whether the mouth on his hand would remain there forever. It was then explained that the split on his hand, which turned into a mouth, had absorbed the bullet's potential energy and converted it into his own power. The scene began with the protagonist having just defeated 2 of Zhao's lackeys. At that moment, 3 more of Zhao's men arrived, pointing guns at the protagonist. One of them commented that the protagonist had jumped out of his turtle shell just to meet his doom. Another man, hiding behind a container, warned his comrades not to let their guard down. They acknowledged the protagonist's strength in defeating Po-jun, and one of them questioned if they were truly afraid, adding that regardless of his skill, there wasn't much he could do in this situation. Just then, the protagonist remained calm and didn't look back immediately. He eventually turned around with a deadly gaze. It was revealed that his palm had transformed into a mouth, and from it, bullets were spat out. The mouth on his hand smiled, giving off an ominous vibe. The sight terrified Zhao's men, who began firing at the protagonist while calling him a monster. The protagonist activated his energy conversion skill, taking the bullets head-on by pointing his palm mouth at them. He wondered why they were so scared of just a mouth on his palm. Suddenly, he lunged forward and kicked the man hiding behind the container, striking him in the mouth. The other two men noticed their comrade had been dealt with. They turned around, only to find the protagonist charging his hand. He thought to himself that they hadn't seen any mutants yet. One of the men fired his gun, but the protagonist put both his hands forward, one towards the gun and the other towards the man himself. He placed both hands in front of the guns being fired at him. After the barrage ended, the protagonist calmly pulled back and noted that they were out of bullets. He remarked that it was a shame. He then grabbed the two guns and used them to swirl both men around him. He stated he had wanted to accumulate more energy, and then violently threw the two men onto the ground. He thought that spitting out the swallowed bullets would close the mouth, which was good. No more weird mouths on his palm. He wondered if it could be used for anything beyond converting potential energy and strengthening himself. Just then, a sniper shot hit his shoulder. A group of Zhao's men questioned the sniper about the shot. The sniper confirmed a hit and believed it was the end. However, the sniper soon heard a strange sound through the scope and noticed that the protagonist was still alive. The protagonist, now enraged, lunged toward the sniper and punched him, saying that the shot had hurt. As other men surrounded him and began firing, one of them urged the others to rush over. Another told them not to panic since he was alone. The protagonist looked at them and thought that he was lucky to have been experimenting with strengthening his body using converted energy. Otherwise, that shot would have finished him. He extended his hand to convert the potential energy from the bullets into his own. He thought to himself that he didn't know if there would be more ambushes and realized he had to escape quickly. A system notification appeared, confirming that energy conversion was complete. The protagonist, now determined, dashed forward at extraordinary speed, thinking he would try releasing the transformed energy all at once. He released the energy, causing a powerful swirl that sent all the men in the warehouse flying. Zhao appeared at that moment, acknowledging that the protagonist was indeed a remarkable individual. Zhao remarked on the protagonist's ability to make bullets and materials vanish and wondered if it was some form of transferability. The protagonist lunged toward Zhao and kicked him, yelling at him to scram. Zhao's hand then transformed into a large stone hand. He mocked the protagonist's soft attack and declared that he hadn't felt a thing. He commanded the protagonist to die. The protagonist looked at the giant stone hand and found himself trapped within it as Zhao declared he would crush him. Zhao was now fully transformed with abnormal eyebrows. The protagonist spat blood and was visibly in pain. Suddenly, with lightning speed, the protagonist escaped Zhao's grasp. He questioned how Zhao could possess supernatural powers even before the apocalypse and suspected it was related to the power stone he had found. Zhao taunted him, asking if he had time to get distracted. Zhao then summoned another giant stone hand and attempted to crush the protagonist. He questioned where the protagonist thought he was running to. The protagonist dodged and activated his energy conversion ability. The same mouth appeared on his palm again, but it didn't seem to fit properly. He retreated and thought that Zhao's energy was offsetting his conversion. Looking at Zhao, he noted that he had never seen him use his powers so well before. He wondered if Zhao had been hiding his strength all along. At that moment, two massive stone hands appeared above the protagonist. Zhao declared that it didn't matter who sent the protagonist, entering this place meant death. However, he admitted to valuing talent and acknowledged the protagonist's rare abilities. He offered a deal. The protagonist should return everything he took, kneel, apologize, and swear loyalty to them. Zhao added that he could make the decision for him to resolve the matter. Bruised and battered, the protagonist replied sarcastically that Zhao seemed quite pleased with himself. He declared that no matter what, he would never return what he had taken. Zhao's expression darkened. He said he had no choice but to take the protagonist's body back to Master Chang. Zhao launched his giant stone hand at the protagonist, threatening to test if his whole body was as durable as his mouth. The protagonist thought about Zhao's combination of metal powers and defensive strength, realizing energy alone wouldn't harm him. He instructed the system to use his remaining energy. His energy level dropped from 70% to 20% as he punched the incoming giant stone hand. As their fists collided, he thought he could only focus all remaining energy into one point. He shouted for the stone hand to break and it shattered on impact. Zhao was visibly terrified. The protagonist approached Zhao, grabbed his shirt and lifted him. Zhao asked about the protagonist's fluctuating powers and his intentions. The protagonist replied that it was just a bit of fun and asked how Zhao had obtained his superpower. Zhao laughed, mocking the protagonist for having powers without understanding their origin. The protagonist realized Zhao wouldn't reveal anything and declared that he could die with his secret. As the protagonist questioned Zhao, Zhao advised him to reconsider. He warned that it was no longer about stolen property and that they could still discuss a deal based on the protagonist's power. Zhao mentioned his close ties with Master Chang, threatening that harming him would lead to consequences. The protagonist dropped Zhao and mentioned Master Chang. Zhao, thinking the protagonist had accepted the offer, expressed satisfaction. However, he was shocked to see the protagonist charging his hand for a punch. The protagonist said that if Zhao waited on the Nei bridge a bit longer, he'd be able to see Master Chang. Zhao tried to shield himself. Before the protagonist could land the blow, Po Jun appeared with a dagger in front of Zhao. The protagonist was surprised and called Po Jun's name. He struck Po Jun, asking if he had a death wish and telling him this wasn't something an ordinary person should be involved in. Po Jun coughed and stood up shakily, apologizing, saying that Zhao couldn't die yet. The protagonist said nothing but stood in silence. He questioned whether Po Jun had been threatened. Po Jun didn't answer. Zhao clapped and praised Po Jun for arriving on time. Zhao, now serious, stated he would report this to Master Chang and give Po Jun credit. He mentioned the possibility that Master Chang might show mercy and release Po Jun's wife and daughter. The protagonist understood the situation and thought to himself about Zhao's despicable nature. Zhao smirked with pride at his own words, then coldly ordered Po Jun to die along with the protagonist and the fallen men around them, since Po Jun had now witnessed this monstrous form of his. He used his ability to construct a stone wall, trapping the protagonist, Po Jun, and other lackeys inside the warehouse. He assured Po Jun that he would say good things about him to Master Chang. A clicking sound then echoed in the warehouse. The protagonist remarked on Zhao's quick retreat but wondered what the clicking sound was. It was then revealed that numerous grenades had appeared, all with their pins removed. That was the source of the clicking sound. The scene opened with the grenades left by Zhao about to explode. However, before the explosion could occur, the ground beneath the protagonist and Po Jun began to break. Utilizing his powers, the protagonist broke the ground himself, taking both of them down into an underground pathway just in time to avoid the blast. They landed in the hidden passageway beneath the warehouse. The protagonist immediately recognized that there was another floor below the casino. Though injured, he noticed the place was filled with all sorts of things. He thought to himself that Zhao was anything but ordinary. Gazing up at the remains of the warehouse where they had stood moments earlier, the protagonist reflected on their narrow escape. Po Jun stood up and admitted his surprise, stating he never expected there to be such a place under the casino. He asked the protagonist how he knew about it, addressing him as Sir. The protagonist, however, remained silent, and the two stared at each other in a moment of quiet tension. Then the protagonist loomed over Po Jun, prompting Po Jun to quickly explain that since Zhao was no longer present, he had no reason to fight anymore. The protagonist turned away and expressed his anger, saying he wanted to kill Zhao for nearly getting them all blown up. Po Jun didn't respond immediately but then stated that Zhao couldn't die yet because he needed to find where Zhao had imprisoned his wife and daughter. He turned to the protagonist, urging him to get treated quickly, warning that his injuries were severe and he might lose his eye and legs. Looking at his own battered body, the protagonist realized the extent of his injuries. Po Jun bowed to him and expressed gratitude, acknowledging that the protagonist had spared and saved him again, regardless of his intent. He admitted he had no way to repay such kindness, but promised to return the favor with his life once he found his family. It was revealed that during the explosion, the protagonist had used his energy to block the blast and simultaneously break the ground beneath them. With an awkward expression, he wondered if Po Jun had always spoken in such a dramatic way, like a character from a military novel. The protagonist imagined Po Jun giving respectful military greetings even during the apocalypse. The protagonist then replied with disinterest, stating he had no interest in Po Jun's life and sat down to tend to his injuries. He admitted that Po Jun was right and treating the wounds was his priority. At that moment, Po Jun tried to help but questioned how they could treat the injuries in such a place, noting the lack of proper materials and suggesting they leave immediately. In response, the protagonist activated his system's space ability and retrieved a first aid kit, complete with medicines, bandages, and sprays. Po Jun, surprised, asked if this was some kind of supernatural power like Zhao's mysterious appearance. While bandaging himself, the protagonist casually replied, asking if Zhao hadn't told him. Po Jun retorted that such information wouldn't be shared with a thug only serving because of his imprisoned family. The protagonist agreed with that logic and inwardly noted that it would all become common knowledge eventually, though he momentarily forgot the apocalypse hadn't occurred yet. Tossing some supplies to Po Jun, he instructed him to treat his own wounds. Po Jun questioned why the protagonist was helping him after he had just tried to kill him. The protagonist answered while still tending to himself, saying that Po Jun couldn't die if he wanted to find his family. He mentioned knowing about this underground floor and speculated that Po Jun's family might be there. He invited Po Jun to search together. Po Jun apologized for shooting him earlier, confessing that he had assumed the protagonist was a looter due to his combat skills. He admitted he hadn't expected the protagonist to be on a different side and called him a surprisingly good guy. The protagonist, hearing this, gave an evil smile and declared his intent to search all 3 underground floors while Po Jun was distracted. He even began to laugh maniacally. Po Jun, clearly annoyed, asked him to pause his robbery plans and take things seriously. The scene transitioned as the two walked through the tunnel. Along the way, they noticed numerous mice scurrying about. Po-jun commented on the various hidden layers of the place. A casino under the supermarket, a warehouse under the casino, and now this secret tunnel. He wondered aloud what Chan Su-dong was planning. The protagonist replied casually, suggesting it looked like an old sewer system. Po-jun, using his flashlight, asked when the tunnel would end. The protagonist reassured him with a serious gaze, promising they were almost there. Eventually, they reached a place sealed by an iron gate. Po-jun asked what the place was, while the protagonist silently confirmed to himself that they had arrived. He recalled that after the apocalypse, Chan Su-dong had used this place to imprison those who resisted him. He had lived there himself for some time and observed that the iron gate seemed to have been in use long before the apocalypse. He considered the existence of power stones, underground warehouses, and deep facilities, concluding that Chan Su-dong knew more than he let on. With that thought, he kicked the gate open, sending it crashing down a staircase. Behind the broken gate lay a dungeon filled with prison cells. Inside, people were coughing and growling. Po-jun identified it as a dungeon where Chan Su-dong was hiding captives. They noticed two women locked in one cell and others scattered across different cells, looking helpless and injured. Po-jun approached one of the cells and asked the women inside if they were okay and what was happening there. One woman facing the wall responded with a chilling request, "Kill me." She repeated the plea, saying she didn't want to turn into a monster. When she turned around, her frightening appearance shocked Po-jun. Stunned, Po-jun asked what she meant by monster, then inquired if she had seen a young woman with a little girl. Before he could get a reply, the protagonist urged him to save the questions for later. A banging sound echoed through the dungeon, signaling something trying to break through a nearby door. Po-jun asked what the noise was. From behind the door, an ominous hand reached out. Soon, various monstrous creatures began emerging, growling as they approached. The protagonist stared at the opening, realizing the severity of the situation, and told Po-jun that they were in big trouble. Monster-like creatures began pouring out from the door, growling. The protagonist looked at them, thinking to himself that the apocalypse had not arrived yet, so he wondered where these mutants had come from. He recalled having used all his energy to block the explosion and realized this situation would be troublesome. Behind him, Po-jun appeared terrified. As the monsters kept emerging, the protagonist continued thinking about the girls still locked up in the dungeon. He knew he couldn't simply walk away and questioned whether he should lure the mutants out first. However, before he could act, Po-jun suddenly pulled out his gun and shot a monster in the head, killing it with a single bullet. A crystal dropped from the dead creature. Observing this, Po-jun fired repeatedly while screaming. But soon in the heat of the moment, his gun ran out of bullets. Realizing this, Po-jun paused just as a monster approached him. The protagonist swiftly grabbed him and shoved him away, shouting for him to watch out and get out of the way. One of the monsters growled, glaring menacingly at them. Po-jun asked what these things were. The protagonist replied that they were low-level mutants and instructed Po-jun to calm down, noting that bullets wouldn't do much against them. He told Po-jun to stay put and stop shooting or he would attract their attention. He assured Po-jun that he would handle the rest. Marching forward to confront the mutants, he added that if things went south, Po-jun should take the imprisoned girls and leave. Despite this, Po-jun hesitated, insisting he couldn't do that. But the protagonist lunged into the horde of mutants while Po-jun called out to him. Landing in the middle of the horde, the protagonist thought to himself that Po-jun was a strange guy. He figured that if they left, it would be easier for him to escape alone, and wondered why Po-jun was resisting so much. Just then, he exclaimed that he found it. Remembering the crystal dropped earlier, he picked up a blue crystal, recognizing it as a crystal core. He realized these mutants possessed crystal cores just like the ones from the apocalypse, but he had momentarily forgotten that he was surrounded by a horde of monsters. Several mutants lunged at him. Po-jun, still worried, watched as all the mutants charged toward the protagonist. Po-jun reflected that the protagonist had actually sacrificed himself for strangers and the victims, vowing never to forget his kindness. As he believed the protagonist was doomed, a system notification suddenly appeared in front of the protagonist, stating that energy conversion was complete. An energy blast erupted from him, killing many nearby mutants as he was enveloped in blue energy. Smiling, the protagonist felt a great surge of power and thought to himself that the crystal core was far more satisfying than electricity. He had absorbed the mutant's crystal core. As the destroyed body parts of the mutants were flung toward Po-jun, the man stood confused. Just moments ago, he had mourned the protagonist's sacrifice, and now the man was effortlessly killing the mutants. With the system panel confirming the energy conversion, the protagonist continued grabbing and destroying mutants with his hands. He exclaimed how wonderful it felt and annihilated more of them, sending body parts flying toward Po-jun, who remained speechless. When a large mutant attempted to attack, the protagonist simply kicked it under its jaw. Gripping another mutant's spine with excitement, he cried out that he wanted more. He then stepped on a mutant's eye and crushed it underfoot, declaring that all the crystal cores should be handed over to him and that no one would escape. Holding a pile of mutant cores in his hands, he thought it was a pity that their quality was trashy. Nonetheless, he wouldn't have to worry about energy for a while. Absorbing all the crystals, he turned to Po-jun and asked why he was still there, reminding him he had been told to go first. Po-jun, exhausted, replied that he couldn't even express himself properly. He then questioned what those monsters truly were. The protagonist explained that they were humans infected by an unknown virus, mutants or new types of organisms. They were brain-dead, driven only by instincts to eat and kill. Po Jun continued questioning, asking if the infection was the same as what had affected the protagonist and Zhao's weird powers. While looking at Po Jun, the protagonist admitted that was true, but noted that after the apocalypse, saying such things about mutants had become a capital crime. With a serious look, he told Po Jun that the real question was why the mutants were here in the first place and where the previous mutant stone had come from. He suspected that Chan Su Dong was conducting experiments. Po Jun reacted in disbelief and asked if the monsters had been transformed from the imprisoned girls in the dungeon. He began to form a terrifying conclusion, but the protagonist remained silent, fully understanding what Po Jun feared, that his wife and daughter might have become mutants. The protagonist then pointed toward the door from which the mutants had emerged, saying that must be the experimentation base. He told Po Jun not to overthink, assuring him that Chan Su Dong wouldn't do that because using hostages for blackmail would be a better strategy. As they entered the experimentation room, the protagonist explained that the mutants they had fought were artificially produced there, which also explained the incomplete crystal cores. Praising Chan Su Dong sarcastically, he pointed out the large tanks filled with green liquid and a well containing the same strange substance. He wondered aloud where so much mutation solution had come from. Po Jun, still lost, stayed silent. Then Po Jun began running, saying there seemed to be people inside the tanks. The protagonist warned him not to touch the green liquid or he might get infected too. At that moment, he noticed a woman inside one of the tanks and shouted to Po Jun to watch out. The girl inside the tank opened her eyes, and before Po Jun could react, she pressed her hand against the glass, cracking it. The tank burst, releasing green liquid everywhere. The protagonist and Po Jun backed away, but in the process, Po Jun stumbled toward the green liquid-filled well. The protagonist called out, asking if he was okay. As he looked at the girl who had emerged from the tank, now covered in blue crystals, he suddenly recognized her. He exclaimed that she was the Ice Queen Chen Qing Yue. The scene shifted to a time before the regression of the protagonist, where mutants were seen attacking a group of people. Among them was a huge man wielding an axe to defend himself. A horde of mutants surrounded the group, and the people fought back using weapons, killing the attackers. The large man questioned his comrade, asking if there was any news from the camp. The comrade replied that they were told to hold on for a while. The big man sighed and expressed concern that if reinforcements weren't sent, they would be crushed by the mutants. It was then revealed that this imposing man was none other than Xiao Zhantian, the heroic army's leader and an A-rank power-type supernatural. Frustrated, he repeated the phrase, holding on, and cursed those who dared call this a mutant beast tide. Suddenly, a blue flash of light appeared, streaking through the city. At that moment, the comrade alerted Xiao Zhantian to look up at the sky. Xiao Zhantian wondered aloud if they had already arrived, surprised by the speed. They all looked up at the blue light, which then descended to the ground with a powerful impact. The force of the landing created numerous ice crystals, instantly killing many mutants. From within the blue light emerged a beautiful girl, her hair glowing a vivid blue, and she stood with an ice sword in hand. She radiated an intense aura as she stood surrounded by ice crystals. Her expression turned serious as she scanned her surroundings. The comrade, surprised, muttered that it was a woman. Xiao Zhantian quickly warned him to lower his voice, saying he was putting his life in danger. He expressed his disbelief that the elders had actually released this deity-like figure. The comrade then speculated if she could be the legendary Ice Queen Chen Qing Yue, especially as she effortlessly slashed through the surrounding mutants using her ice sword and materialized ice crystals. The comrade remarked that just one strike had defeated many mutants and questioned if this was the power of an S-rank supernatural. With swift and precise movements, Chen Qing defeated all the nearby monsters, leaving her surrounded by ice crystal spikes. The crowd cheered, shouting that they were saved, while Chen Qing thought to herself that the rest should be manageable. Yet she questioned why the beast tide appeared so close to the camp. At that moment, a huge mutant appeared, capturing a man and letting out a loud roar that caught Chen Qing's attention. The crowd identified it as a half-face. Chen Qing noted the intense pressure emanating from the mutant and turned to the people, telling them they couldn't handle this one and should retreat. She assured them she would cover their escape. Xiao Zhantian immediately urged his men to flee, asking if they had a death wish. Chen Qing stared at the mutant and pondered why a Lord-level mutant was present. She suspected that this beast tide might have been orchestrated by it and questioned if it was a trap. The mutant simply glared at her before suddenly launching an attack. Chen Qing responded by forming ice swords using her powers, thinking she had no choice but to fight. The scene then transitioned to Chen Qing lying asleep. She abruptly woke up looking confused. She noticed her wound had been bandaged, particularly around her chest. Recalling her last memory of fighting a Lord-level mutant, she questioned if she had died and wondered where she was and who had changed her clothes. At that moment, someone plunged a spoon into canned food and asked if she was awake. It was none other than the protagonist. He explained that he had found her lying on the ground while searching for supplies and asked what had happened and how she had gotten hurt. Offering her the canned food, he noted that it wasn't easy to find such supplies anymore and urged her to eat. The scene then returned to the present, showing Po Jun drowning in a green liquid inside a well. The protagonist shouted out in distress. Looking at Chen Qing, he thought that he hadn't seen her since she recovered from her injury. He wondered how, before his rebirth, she had ended up in Chan Su Dong's facility. Chen Qing now emerged from a tank, held her head, saying it hurt while her body was covered in crystals. She gasped as pain surged through her and she screamed. Gathering energy above her head, she shouted for destruction and a barrage of ice crystals formed above her. The protagonist shielded himself from the surge of power, thinking she was going to destroy everything, and questioned her sanity. He called out to her while struggling against the immense force, moving closer despite the resistance. He thought to himself that they were several floors underground and that if there were a landslide, not even gods could save them. He knew he had to stop her. Coming closer, he asked her if she wanted everyone to die, telling her that although he didn't know what had happened, she needed to calm down. However, in his attempt to stop her, he accidentally placed his hands on her chest. An awkward silence followed as the protagonist slowly realized what he had done. Chen Qing, now furious, erupted in rage. The protagonist tried to explain, saying that it wasn't his intention, but she was already enraged and retaliated by sending numerous ice spikes in his direction. The scene began as the protagonist used his hand to block the ice crystal spikes hurtling toward him. He activated his ability, and the mouth formed on his hand began chewing through the incoming ice crystals. He then triggered his energy conversion, muttering that it had been a close call and that he had almost been turned into a hedgehog. He looked at Chen Qing and questioned aloud whether it was dementia, noting the situation had worsened. Addressing Chen Qing, he reminded her that he had asked her to calm down. Without hesitation, he lunged toward her, placing both hands on her face and channeling energy through them to shock her. The impact left Chen Qing with blank eyes as if dazed, and she began to collapse. In the next moment, she fell to the ground unconscious, and the protagonist suggested she lie down for a bit. At that moment, he turned his attention to the well and approached it to pull Po Jun out. He asked Po Jun if he was okay and cursed the silence that had persisted for too long. As he pulled Po Jun from the well, he noticed that Po Jun was coughing and drenched in green liquid. Observing Po Jun's unconscious body, the protagonist noted he was still breathing, though he had been soaking in that liquid for quite some time. The thought crossed his mind whether he should kill Po Jun now, fearing that if Po Jun mutated, he might team up with Chen Qing and become a threat. But he reconsidered, recalling memories of Po Jun before his regression and concluding that Po Jun had potential to develop a superpower. Deciding to leave him be for the moment, the protagonist turned his focus to Chen Qing, realizing she was now the immediate problem. He resolved to find something to tie her up with. While he was lost in thought, Chen Qing began to stand behind him, gathering energy to attack. Sensing her movement without turning around, the protagonist cursed, questioning how she had recovered so quickly. She now appeared monstrous, almost as if encased in ice armor. With a wild and menacing look in her eyes, she stared him down like a beast ready to pounce. The protagonist wondered if the ice armor was interfering with conductivity. Chen Qing gritted her teeth and launched her next attack, sending waves of energy at him. The protagonist twisted his legs and used his bullet kick to shatter the energy waves, which had turned into ice crystals. But Chen Qing wasn't done. She conjured more ice crystal spikes and hurled them at him. Some of the spikes caught him and pushed him backward, prompting him to ask aloud why it wouldn't end. Like a feral beast, Chen Qing was relentless. In a fury, she summoned more spikes and repeatedly screamed, "Die, die, die, die." Her monstrous form began to evolve further, and the protagonist realized that if he didn't stop this soon, the Ice Queen would mutate beyond saving. He acknowledged that the electric shock had failed and his energy bullet kick couldn't close the distance. Just then, a system panel appeared, suggesting he consider activating the gene lock. He questioned what a gene lock was, his gaze fixed on the panel. Before the system could respond, one of Chen Qing's ice crystal spikes pierced the system interface, startling him. He shouted, begging for more time to read, insisting he was trying to help her. Stumbling over Po Jun's unconscious body, he looked down and cursed, realizing he could no longer run. He was backed into a corner, standing at the edge of the well. Covered in ice crystal spikes, he fell into the well with a splash. As he sank into the liquid, another system panel appeared, offering a hint. Once his ability progress reached 10%, he could activate the gene lock. It asked whether he wished to activate it. Thinking to himself, he confirmed the progress had reached 10% and wondered if this was a quest reward skill. The system notified him that he could devour the virus to grow stronger and repeated the prompt. Did he wish to activate the gene lock? Faced with the choice of yes or no, he considered the word devour and realized the moment was critical. But where could he find a large quantity of the virus? As he ran out of breath, he had an idea. He was literally drowning in the virus. Just then, the well began to swell rapidly. The pressure built faster and faster until a red light shimmered within the swirl of liquid. The contents of the well began to churn and swirl around the room. Chen Qing, now fully monstrous, was left confused. A hurricane of liquid formed, and within it a shadow emerged. It was the protagonist, now transformed, his body glowing red. His hand had changed too, with the mouth on his palm sucking in the surrounding liquid. The mouth gurgled as it consumed all of it. The protagonist had entered a mutant form. His body had transformed, now adorned with 2 horns on his head and a red armor-like scale covering him. He opened his eyes, revealing glowing crimson irises that blazed brightly. The scene began with the protagonist emerging in his mutant form from the green liquid well. He looked at himself in confusion, questioning what had happened. Panic set in as he exclaimed that it felt like he was turning into a mutant. Holding the two horns that had grown on his forehead, he expressed that although he still retained consciousness, his current form made it impossible to move. He feared that if anyone at the camp saw him like this after the apocalypse, he would be executed on the spot. At that very moment, the protagonist noticed something and looked to the side. There was no time to dwell on panic because Chen Qingyue launched an attack, hurling a massive iceberg at him. The force of the blow sent the protagonist flying, revealing that Chen Qingyue had lost all control. Despite the sudden attack, the protagonist managed to catch the iceberg with one hand, successfully defending himself. He protected not only himself but also the unconscious Po Jun. The protagonist, looking menacing and clearly angry, he questioned aloud whether he could ever return to normal. Annoyed, he muttered that it didn't matter and decided to let it go. Seeing that the protagonist remained unharmed only enraged Chen Qingyue further. She growled in frustration as the protagonist continued to hold the iceberg, staring menacingly at her. In response, Chen Qingyue roared and conjured numerous ice crystal spikes, shouting "Die!" as she hurled them at the protagonist. Unfazed, the protagonist smashed the iceberg he had been holding with a single punch. The ice crystals continued closing in, but he extended his hand to defend himself. As the spikes crashed into him, he calmly stated that he would deal with the situation at hand before thinking of anything else. Blocking all the ice crystals, he smirked, realizing that he could repel them just by raising his hand. He noted with satisfaction that both his strength and defense had increased significantly, declaring that it felt great, but it was already too late. Chen Qingyue lunged toward him. The protagonist stepped forward and asked if she was indeed Chen Qingyue. However, she showed no interest in talking and attacked again while still midair. As she drew near, the protagonist asked whether she could still understand human speech. She remained unresponsive, resembling a wild cat poised to pounce. In the next moment, she swiftly moved through the air and conjured two blades of ice, aiming to slice the protagonist's head. Shock crossed her face when the protagonist stopped her attack with his hand, breaking her ice blades effortlessly. He remarked that it might sound strange, but the Chen Qingyue he remembered also wielded dual ice blades. He had completely destroyed the ice weapons she had formed, yet Chen Qingyue didn't stop. She prepared to launch another attack, but this time the protagonist was ready. He gathered energy in his hand and asked if she intended to come at him again. As she formed an ice barrier to defend herself, the protagonist punched her. The impact of his punch, radiating red energy, enveloped the entire room and disrupted all of Chen Qingyue's ice crystals. The ice barrier began to crack under the force of his blow. The protagonist stated that he was helping her, then shouted "break," as his punch shattered the barrier and landed directly on Chen Qingyue's stomach. The blow was so fierce that red energy from the protagonist surged through her, dispersing her powers. Chen Qingyue collapsed to her knees, her ice crystals vanishing as she returned to her human form. The protagonist stood over her menacingly, watching her unconscious figure. Looking at her, he asked if she could calm down now, his voice serious. He then covered her undressed body with a cloth, thinking to himself with a sigh that although her energy had dispersed and she had returned to normal, staying in mutant form too long might make her mutate again. It was up to fate now. He decided to cover her up first. The protagonist questioned why the situation had repeated itself, recalling that she hadn't had clothes when he encountered her during the apocalypse before his regression. As he pondered these thoughts, he suddenly collapsed to the ground with a thud. Unable to move, the protagonist began reverting to his original human form. He wondered what was happening as pain surged through his body. He groaned in agony, lamenting that the system hadn't warned him about this kind of side effect. Sweating profusely, he realized the gravity of the situation, muttering that he hadn't even tied up Chen Qingyue and Po Jun yet, and that he couldn't afford to pass out. But despite his determination, he lost consciousness. Some time passed, and Chen Qingyue awoke. Now back to her normal self, she looked around in confusion. Her gaze landed on the unconscious protagonist, and she appeared puzzled, clearly wondering where she was and what had just happened. The scene shifted after a few moments. The protagonist opened his eyes, and Chen Qingyue questioned him with a soft, surprised voice, saying he was awake. He twitched slightly and tried to get up, only to realize he had been lying unconscious on her lap. As he attempted to rise, Chen Qingyue gently urged him not to move, her eyes filled with concern. She told him he was injured and needed to rest, gently pushing him back down onto her lap. The protagonist, now flustered, became acutely aware of her enormous melons, which were, without exaggeration, very huge. To avoid the awkward moment and distract himself, he began coughing. Trying to move the conversation forward, he asked Chen Qingyue something, though his sentence started off stumbling. He seemed caught between thoughts. Chen Qingyue responded, admitting that she had actually been conscious the entire time. It had only felt like something else had taken over her body. She thanked him for helping her and added that he seemed familiar. She wondered aloud if they had met before. This puzzled the protagonist. Sitting up again from her lap, he asked if she had also returned from the apocalyptic future. But Chen Qingyue, now visibly confused and dazed, questioned him back, asking what he meant by future and if he was referring to her current attire. She didn't seem to understand what he was talking about. Once again, his gaze unintentionally drifted back to her massive melons. Meanwhile, Chen Qingyue somehow misinterpreted his original question, thinking he was asking about her clothes. She clarified, asking if he meant the outfit she was wearing and explained she had found it and needed to wear something. He responded that it was fine and that he was just momentarily confused after waking up. The misunderstanding became clear. When he asked if she was from the future, the word for future in Mandarin sounded similar to the word for wearing clothes. So due to the language quirk, Chen Qingyue thought he was asking about her outfit, which ironically turned out to be his own clothes. Thus, their whole miscommunication revolved around linguistic similarities. The protagonist then reflected inwardly, thinking this meant he needed to stay alert for others like himself. He asked her how she got caught by Chan Su-dong. Chen Qingyue looked puzzled and asked what that was. She explained she had been kidnapped but couldn't remember anything. The only thing she recalled during the time her body was being controlled was chaos. With a serious expression, she shared that the ones who kidnapped her referred to themselves as chaos. As she recalled two shadowy, anonymous figures, the protagonist silently repeated the word chaos. It was unfamiliar to him even before his regression. He pondered how they had used Chan Su-dong's territory and what that implied. Just then, Chen Qingyue clung tightly to him and declared that the organization was well hidden and powerful. Since he had destroyed their base and saved her, she said she would follow him from now on. Startled by her sudden declaration, the protagonist pushed her back and asked what she meant by that. He questioned her motives, suggesting she just wanted to hide with him to escape the organization. He told her that if that were the case, it wouldn't work out. Turning away, he explained that if they tracked her down, he'd also be in danger. He had no intention of provoking any powerful group, and wearing his best Sigma face added that he had more important matters to attend to. But deep down, he admitted inwardly that even though her soft body was in his arms, the PTSD from Anna's betrayal triggered instantly. He cursed himself for his reaction and questioned what kind of grave emotional illness he was suffering from. Chen Qingyue then admitted she had initially thought of revenge, but had he not woken her up, she would have become nothing more than a puppet for chaos. She confessed she couldn't remember anything, her name, her background, only that he felt familiar. She asked sincerely where else she could go if not with him. Looking at her, the protagonist thought to himself that this was amnesia, Still, he acknowledged her potential strength and usefulness. Since the organization had used Chan Su-dong's territory, it was clearly tied to him. Speaking to her, he said that if she was willing to obey his orders, then following him wouldn't be impossible. Chen Qingyue beamed with happiness and blushed. She leapt onto him with excitement, saying that was great. But her leap was a bit too energetic. Her weight brought him crashing down to the ground, and she ended up sprawled on top of him, wearing a mischievous grin. She leaned in close and whispered that she would definitely obey his orders, clearly trying to seduce him. Just then, Po Jun appeared behind Chen Qingyue with a dagger in hand, calling out to the protagonist that he had come to save him. He shouted at Chen Qingyue, calling her a demon and declaring it was time for her to die. The dagger glinted dangerously close to her. However, Po Jun's expression twisted into horror as his hand, the one holding the dagger, suddenly turned to crystal. Chen Qingyue had used her powers to crystallize his right hand, freezing it entirely. Stunned, Po Jun asked what was happening, but she gave him no time to react. Forming an ice sword, she pointed it straight at him. Po Jun remained silent, frozen in fear. The protagonist's voice rang out, commanding Chen Qingyue to stop. She complied immediately, though the ice sword was now mere inches from Po Jun's eyes. He stood terrified. The protagonist told Po Jun that Chen Qingyue was not an enemy. Po Jun, still in disbelief, asked who this girl was. The protagonist interrupted, saying it was a long story. He then turned to Chen Qingyue and told her, "You are my person now." Looking at Po Jun, he remarked that he had fallen into a well filled with green liquid not long ago. He asked if Po Jun felt any different. Po Jun replied that nothing felt particularly strange, but the protagonist remained suspicious, staring at him intently. Activating his system space ability, the protagonist told Po Jun that it wouldn't be too late to kill him if he mutated. Noting the green liquid still on Po Jun, he said they needed to clean it off. Po Jun, unnerved, remarked that the protagonist was saying scary things with a calm face. The protagonist retrieved spare clothes from his system space and handed them to both Chen Qingyue and Po Jun, explaining he had picked them up from a supermarket above. He told them to change their clothes. Chen Qingyue took the clothes and agreed to change, but then began undressing right there in front of both guys. The two immediately panicked and shouted at her. The protagonist pushed her gently and directed her to a nearby hall, telling her to change there instead. Chen Qingyue blinked and responded with mock innocence, saying she didn't know there was a room. She cheekily added that she thought he wanted to see her undressed. Meanwhile, Po Jun, still frozen-handed, pointed at his crystallized arm in confusion, silently asking, "What about me? And what about my hand?" The scene shifted moments later. Chen Qingyue was seen using her ice powers on the jail bars, freezing them solid and then easily cracking them open. Inside, the captured women looked toward her, their eyes filled with surprise and cautious hope. Chen Qingyue reassured them, telling them not to be afraid and that they were all safe now. Chen Qingyue, the protagonist, and Po Jun were shown freeing all the captured girls. Addressing them, Chen Qingyue declared that that was about it. She told them they could choose for themselves. Those who wanted to leave were free to do so, but she suggested they stay. She reasoned they had nowhere to go just like her and posed this sentiment as a question to all the captured girls. From a distance, the protagonist and Po Jun silently observed everything. Right at that moment, Po Jun called out to the protagonist, addressing him as Sir, and the protagonist responded. Po Jun asked if the apocalypse the protagonist had mentioned was actually true. The protagonist replied with sarcasm, questioning how Po Jun could still doubt him after witnessing him pull things out of thin air. Po Jun conceded that was true, but then admitted he had been thinking if there was still time maybe they should part ways. Po Jun's expression was visibly filled with worry and sadness. The protagonist questioned him part ways, and then concluded that Po Jun planned to use the next few days to find his wife and daughter. Inwardly, the protagonist reflected on the fact that Po Jun had never once mentioned his family after the apocalypse. At that moment, the protagonist used his system's space ability, pulling out a bunch of guns and tossing them to Po Jun. He warned that going out would be a suicide mission and insisted Po Jun take the weapons. Po Jun stood in awe. The protagonist elaborated that the dungeon was a perfect place to survive the shockwave. He expressed certainty that Chan Su-dong had hidden Po Jun's family in a similar place, meaning they would likely be fine. Continuing, the protagonist suggested Po Jun spend the next few days training the captured kids and tidying up the place. He warned that Chan Su-dong wouldn't let them go so easily, and they had to be prepared for his retaliation. As he turned away, the protagonist added that when it came to Po Jun's family, with a devilish and monstrous expression, he would make sure Po Jun could personally ask about them. The scene then shifted to the supermarket above and from there to one of the buildings. Inside a room, a man was seated on a chair while someone kneeled in front of him. The man seated commended the person kneeling, telling him he had done a good job this time. The person kneeling, a fat man, smiled and replied enthusiastically that, of course, since it was a personal order from the master, he handled it himself and assured him that every single item would be delivered. The man on the chair smoked casually and asked the fat man if he had snuck a peek at the goods. The fat man began sweating profusely and nervously laughed, addressing him as Master Chan Su-dong, and claimed he was joking and that he wouldn't dare do such a thing. It was revealed that the man seated was indeed Chan Su-dong. Chan Su-dong then instructed the fat man to go ahead and take a look. He stated that the things brought to him were the foundation of his new world. The fat man turned around and looked, seeing a group of people submerged in green liquid inside tanks. He gasped in shock and exclaimed that they were people. Horrified, he questioned what those things were. Without hesitation, Chan Su-dong approached the fat man and snapped his neck in an instant, killing him and coldly remarking that he was asking too many questions. Someone was seen observing this entire scene from within the room. Chan Su-dong, with chilling finality, stated that only the dead could keep a secret and added that trash like the fat man wouldn't have survived long anyway, so he should be grateful for receiving a swift death. The observer of the scene was none other than Zhao. At that moment, Chan Su-dong turned to Zhao and questioned him. Shouldn't he be watching over the casino? Why was he here? Zhao, hesitating and visibly terrified, responded with a horrified expression, calling Chan Su-dong boss and informing him that both the casino and warehouse had been raided. Everything was gone. He also admitted they lost a lot of men and that a single brat had gone straight for the warehouse. He confessed he had no clue how the information had gotten leaked. Chan Su-dong, now intrigued, asked if it was just a single brat. Zhao nervously called out the name and tried to defend himself, but Chan Su-dong clenched his fist in anger and looked ready to punch Zhao. In panic, Zhao quickly added that the brat seemed to possess some weird spatial ability and unusual powers. Zhao promised to bring Killer Bio this time and assured they would definitely capture the brat. Just as Chan Su-dong was about to punch Zhao, who seemed utterly terrified, he stopped, intrigued by the mention of a special ability. Even though he refrained from striking Zhao directly, the force of his halted punch was so immense that it cracked the walls behind Zhao. The explosion resulting from the impact was so massive that it destroyed the room. Chan Su-dong then turned away and declared that Judgment Day was almost here. Zhao remained petrified, glancing back at the hole in the wall created by Chan Su-dong's power. Chan Su-dong continued his commands, instructing Zhao to lay low for now. When Judgment Day arrived, Zhao was to carry out their plan. Chan Su-dong ordered him to bring the kid to him alive or dead and reminded Zhao of the importance of the warehouse supplies and the lab tests in the new world. He told Zhao to think very carefully about the consequences of failing again. Zhao obediently responded with a fearful "yes, boss." But internally, Chan Su-dong contemplated the idea of a special ability. He wondered if it was another monkey that had escaped from the lab. It was made clear that a showdown between the protagonist and Chan Su-dong was inevitable. A few days later, the scene shifted above Earth. In space, a swarm of meteor-like rocks hurtled toward the planet at an enormous speed. One of them crashed directly into a space center, obliterating it instantly. Another meteorite descended upon Earth, slamming into the ground with a massive boom that destroyed everything around it. The impact signaled that the end had arrived, right on time. The city lay in ruins, buildings crumbled, dust coated everything, and devastation stretched as far as the eye could see. Amid this chaos, someone was seen watching the events unfold on a TV screen. The sounds of rumbling filled the air, and the viewers were revealed to be Zhao and Chan Su-dong. Zhao turned to Chan Su-dong and remarked that this was the judgment day the boss had mentioned earlier. Chan Su-dong, deep in thought, responded with a crooked smile, declaring that it wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Amid the destruction, a man in an office suit stumbled through the rubble, cursing and questioning what was happening. He noticed a distant figure and assumed it was another survivor. Approaching him, the man called out, asking if the stranger was okay and why he was spacing out at a time like this. But when the figure turned, it revealed a terrifying mutant, clearly not human. The mutant growled and the office worker, terrified, began backing away. The mutant didn't care, he lunged and began killing him mercilessly. Similar mutant creatures began appearing all over the city. Meanwhile, deep underground in a dungeon, tremors from the meteor impact shook the walls. Inside, the protagonist and his companions felt the quake. Po Jun identified it as an earthquake and noted that just as the protagonist had predicted, the apocalypse had truly arrived. He urged everyone to stay calm and follow their training. The girls who had been previously captured were now free and armed with firearms. In unison, they responded affirmatively to Po Jun's command. Among them stood Chen Qingyue, who silently questioned whether things would really unfold as the protagonist had said. She wondered how he could have possibly known what was coming. The protagonist, standing tall with his hands in the pockets of his jacket like an alpha male, sighed and called out to his system, instructing it to show him the attribute panel. The system responded with understood, and a panel appeared displaying his stats. His evolution rate was at 10%, HP at 1200, strength at 115, agility at 110, defense at 120, and gene lock level was 1. His abilities included energy conversion, bullet kick, and lightning. Looking at his attributes, the protagonist thought to himself that after unlocking the gene lock, all his stats had more than tripled. He felt confident that this would be enough. The system then issued a reminder. With the apocalypse descending, all mutants would exhibit maximum aggression toward the host for the next 24 hours and would relentlessly target and attack him. The task was now active. The protagonist acknowledged this with a determined expression, simply replying, "Got it." Another system panel popped up, alerting that a large number of mutants were nearby. Po Jun confirmed this, stating that he could hear their footsteps, they were here. A follow-up reminder from the system emphasized the mission objective once again, survive. The protagonist, after dismissing the panel, acknowledged with a calm understood. The mutants began pounding on the dungeon door until they broke through. A horde of them charged toward the protagonist, who simply stood there, eyes closed, and said, "Just like we planned before, let's go." Right then, Chen Qingyue responded to his command with a resolute "got it." She activated her powers and conjured massive ice shards to block the dungeon entrance, halting the mutants' advance. She confirmed that the entrance had been sealed. The protagonist nodded in approval, acknowledging that since they couldn't run, it was time to face them. As he faced the lunging mutants, flames ignited around him. His face began to transform, half of it turning red as he entered his mutant form. Red chains began swirling around him. He clenched them in his fist and thought back to his past life. He recalled how pathetically he had died before. But now, given a second chance, even without the system, he vowed to prove himself. Speaking aloud, he asked, "Are you ready?" And revealed that he had deliberately blocked the entrance so that all the mutants would charge in at once. He directed this to the mutants, even though it was doubtful they could understand. Chen Qingyue observed the scene, sensing the terrifying presence of the mutants and the strange aura surrounding the protagonist. She noted that it even made her mutant self feel fear. The protagonist's aura was like that of a higher-level mutant. His right hand had fully mutated, and the chains he had once played with now lay broken. He thought to himself that in this life he would seize everything until he stood at the pinnacle of the world. His eyes gleamed golden like those of a beast, and with unwavering resolve he declared, "It's hunting time." The protagonist declared that from now on, the crystal cores of the mutants were more valuable than gold currency and asserted that no one was getting away. But just then he noticed something and told everyone to hold on a second. He exclaimed in confusion, asking what the hell was going on with his right hand, which had suddenly transformed. He was shocked, stating that no one had informed him about any half-baked transformation like this. The mutant stood observing him, making all sorts of strange noises. At that moment, the protagonist requested that they not come any closer. He wanted to ask the busted system something first, though it seemed like the mutants didn't care in the slightest. One of them engulfed him, and he yelled for it to pause as he tried to make sense of the situation. Suddenly, a mouth with monster-like teeth appeared on the palm of his right hand and began sucking all the mutants into it. The protagonist, in disbelief, shouted at the hand, asking why it wouldn't listen to him. He demanded the hand stop acting on its own, cursing in frustration. He questioned the system, demanding to know what was going on. Just then, the system panel appeared, stating that a massive amount of crystal core energy had been absorbed and a new system upgrade was possible. The protagonist was bewildered and questioned if there was a new system being activated. The panel confirmed the upgrade and notified him that the system was now temporarily unable to respond. Enraged, the protagonist told the system not to start upgrading on its own. As the system began to shut down and restart, the protagonist, surrounded by mutants, screamed for it not to shut down without his permission. He cursed again, pleading with the system to wait until he finished dealing with the mutants. In that moment, a mutant's hand reached toward his face, but vine-like creatures erupted from his transformed hand, wrapping around and attacking the mutants. Fueled by rage, the protagonist shouted at the mutants to get lost, and the vine-like creatures began slaughtering them and devouring their crystal cores. As this unfolded, the protagonist started thinking to himself that the more crystal cores the hand absorbed, the more his consciousness faded. He wondered if all that rage had been the hand's doing. Meanwhile, Po-jun noticed something was wrong and questioned why the protagonist wasn't moving, sensing that something was off. The protagonist stood surrounded by vine-like creatures emerging from his mutant hand, continuing to kill the surrounding mutants. Chen Qingyue inwardly thought that he needed help, but then realized she had become too focused on him. She had forgotten about the door. She noticed that a massive number of mutants had destroyed the ice crystals blocking the door and were now pouring into the dungeon. She panicked, thinking they were about to be overwhelmed. The horde of mutants approached the protagonist, who was in his half-mutant state, while the vine-like creatures from his hand kept killing and devouring as many as they could. Chen Qingyue called out to the protagonist, offering to help him. However, he was panting heavily and told her to stay back. With a fierce gaze, he warned her to stay away, saying he couldn't hold on much longer. The scene then shifted to a TV screen where Zhao pointed out to Master Chan Su-dong that all the creatures in the area were gathering in one place. Zhao noted that the gathering seemed to be near their casino. Chan Su-dong replied that it didn't make sense since those mutants didn't usually act in groups. Zhao speculated that the brat, referring to the protagonist, couldn't possibly know about Judgment Day and must have done something to draw the mutants there. He concluded that the protagonist was as good as dead and called it a pity. Back in the underground dungeon, the protagonist was completely surrounded by mutants. At that critical moment, the system beeped and announced that the system update was complete. In the next second, all the mutants were sent flying, and the protagonist emerged from the mass fully transformed. The system panel displayed that the host's genome had unlocked to level 20% and a new system had been activated. The protagonist now looked like a demon from hell. The system announced that the new system was called the Tyrant. The protagonist prepared to annihilate the mutants with one hand, and red blades shot out of him like Wolverine. On the other hand, a blade extended outward, ready for battle. All the mutants were getting shredded, ripped apart into bits and pieces, and it was clear that the carnage was being carried out by none other than the fully transformed protagonist. He was tearing into mutant flesh with monstrous teeth, roaring like a beast, and the only thought hammering in his skull was a singular, savage one: kill them all. His roar echoed like a war cry. Po-jun called out to him, but Chen Qingyue cut off Po-jun's path. She stared at the protagonist, her mind flashing with an uneasy recognition. He looked exactly like she once had, totally out of control, swallowed whole by bloodlust. She thought he probably couldn't control himself at all right now. More mutants made eerie guttural noises as they closed in, but the protagonist wasn't fazed. Blades burst from his hands, swirling violently as he spun through the crowd, cutting mutants apart in a storm of steel. His silhouette loomed menacingly amidst the chaos. He didn't just kill, he slaughtered. Every mutant in his path was reduced to nothing. At that moment, Chen Qingyue leapt and landed behind him. The protagonist turned, sensing her presence. She called out to him, but it was useless. He wasn't in control anymore. He lunged straight at her with predatory intent. Chen Qingyue instantly realized he had lost all control. She summoned her ice powers, shouting for him to calm down, to wake up from his haze. An ice shield formed in front of her, but the protagonist roared and shattered it in a single strike, obliterating it like glass. She gasped in shock. It only took one blow. His terrifying form towered over her, radiating so much pressure that she froze in place, unable to move. His claw-like blades hovered just inches from her when suddenly his eyes widened. Memories began crashing back. He saw a shelter where Chen Qingyue and he once were. She had asked him how long she had been recovering there. He told her nearly 3 months, that her injuries should have healed long ago. She looked at him then and asked if he really wouldn't come back to the base with her. He told her flatly that he was powerless, just dead weight, and he didn't want to deal with all those people's fake-ass faces every day. Chen Qingyue had confessed that she had actually healed a while ago. She hesitated, then admitted she was scared that if they parted ways, they'd never see each other again. He had smiled, reassuring her. He told her not to worry, that once he finished what he needed to do, he would come visit her at the camp. If fate allowed, they'd meet again. Back in the present, his monstrous blades began to wither away, his entire monstrous form collapsing with them. He looked at Chen Qingyue and with a faint voice said they had met again. Chen Qingyue's face was filled with confusion, but before she could say anything, he dropped to his knees. She rushed to him, consoling and supporting him, asking if he was okay now. He coughed violently, weak but conscious. The girls watching from above finally exhaled. One admitted she had been tense the whole time, sighing in relief. Another said it looked like it was finally over. A third pointed out in shock that the protagonist had wiped out all the monsters by himself, while another muttered that it was just insane. Po-jun stood there, staring at the destruction. Every mutant in the underground dungeon had been wiped out by the protagonist alone. Looking down at himself, Po-jun murmured that this was what it meant to be awakened. He clenched his fist, wishing for that kind of power, but quickly shook off the thought and barked orders to the girls. He told them not to stand around to clean up the site, reassemble, and prep for the next attack. They responded in unison, acknowledging his command. The scene shifted to a factory-like structure. Anna was there with Zhao. She complained, asking what this place was since Zhao had claimed it was an important mission and dragged her here. Zhao snapped back, telling her to quit whining. If not for Lord Chan Su Dong's orders, he wouldn't have bothered at all. Then a huge man loomed over them, his shadow swallowing the space. He spoke to Zhao in a tone that dripped with mock sorrow, saying his words broke his heart. Anna froze, startled, her eyes widening as she looked at the monstrous figure before her. His menacing gaze locked onto her, terrifying her to the core. She suddenly noticed something in the background and her heart dropped. Behind the massive man lay the corpse of a woman. Horror washed over her as she realized what it meant. This man had sick, twisted fantasies. The huge man questioned Zhao, asking if he had brought him a woman. Zhao snapped at him to cut the crap. Zhao then told him that Lord Chan Su Dong wanted him at the casino and that he should bring anyone useful with him. That was when his name was revealed, Sang Bio. The scene jumped again, this time to a pair of helicopters, rotors cutting the air as men swarmed around them. Orders barked out through the noise, commanding everyone to move quickly, stop wasting time, and board immediately. They were to occupy Area A and wipe out any other factions in their assigned territories. The helicopters hovered near the factory structure. Inside, Anna's thoughts spun. She thought it was a jackpot. She hadn't expected Master Chan Su Dong's influence to be so massive. But what really concerned her were the rumors. She remembered the stories of an elite group deployed specifically to handle ability users. They were called the Executioners. She realized with a chill that the protagonist had forced them to mobilize. The scene shifted again, this time to the Executioners themselves. Their boss asked if everything was ready. Cloaked figures emerged, their faces hidden behind ominous masks, radiating pure menace. They stood in black, lined up side by side. One of them, impatient, whined for the boss to hurry up because he couldn't wait any longer. Another questioned the need for this at all, pointing out that according to Zhao, the target was just some brat. He doubted whether the protagonist had even survived the mutant attacks, asking why they all had to go through the trouble. Their boss silenced them, explaining that he had just received intel. There was a lab under the casino where that woman was kept. At the mention of that woman, one of the executioners stopped stunned and asked if the boss really meant test subject K423, the Ice Queen. The scene abruptly shifted to Chen Qingyue, who was seen questioning Po Jun. She demanded to know where the protagonist was, saying she had looked everywhere but still couldn't find him. Po Jun replied that the protagonist had said he was going to scout the surroundings after waking up and should be back soon. Chen Qingyue pressed further, saying he went out but his body. Before she could finish, Po Jun interrupted, explaining that the protagonist said he was fine, though he suspected that he only said that because he didn't want to hurt them if he lost control. Chen Qingyue shot back, asking how he could possibly be fine when even his hair had changed like that. Po Jun responded that the protagonist didn't seem too concerned about it. But Chen Qingyue, clearly troubled, muttered that he always insisted on handling everything by himself. She asked why he couldn't trust them more, her face showing a flicker of sadness as she continued questioning if he still thought she was too weak. Right then, the scene shifted to the middle of the city, where someone was speeding recklessly on a bike. The roaring engine and insane speed made it obvious. The rider was none other than the protagonist. As he blazed through the ruins, he ruthlessly cut down mutants that got in his way, leaving their corpses scattered in his trail. Finally, he parked the bike, got off, and stood in the wreckage, staring at the destroyed cityscape. He commanded, "System, open the map." The system panel appeared. Removing his eyewear, he studied it closely and muttered that the city layout around the meteor crater was split into zones, just like he remembered from before his rebirth. He thought to himself that if nothing changed, ability users and high-level mutants would begin seizing and merging territories in the coming years, eventually forming stable power zones. The casino, he reflected, was still far from the nearest crater, actually a decent spot to hide and develop slowly. That was assuming he could first clear out the ability user factions in the area. As for the mutants, he remembered that no Lord Class 1s existed nearby before, but the biggest problem now. He broke his thought to call out to the Tyrant system, but the system didn't reply. Annoyed, the protagonist demanded, "What exactly is my ability and what does Tyrant even mean?" Still, the Tyrant system remained silent. Clicking his tongue, he muttered, not answering at all. "Whatever, open the status panel." The system obeyed this time, flashing up his stats and announcing, "Congratulations, host gene lock unlocked to level 2. His status read, evolution level at 25%, HP at 3500, strength 350, agility 330, defense 360, gene lock level 2. His abilities included energy conversion, bullet kick, and lightning. His unique skill was listed as Tyrant's Wrath. The protagonist stared at it, frowning. Tyrant's Wrath, is that the skill that made me lose control? If I hadn't snapped out in time, the consequences would have been straight-up catastrophic. He thought grimly that Chen Qingyue probably still didn't know that no one else had been controlling his body in that moment. It was simply him, just raw, unfiltered bloodlust, the pure desire to annihilate everything alive around him. What exactly snapped him out of it? Was it Chen Qingyue's completely non-resistant posture? Either way, he cursed that the damn system clearly had its own hidden agenda. With a crooked grin, he muttered, "Whatever, we'll just use each other." He shifted his focus again, thinking out loud, "As long as I can take down Chan Su Dong, that is." Then he ordered, "Hey system, show me detailed info on Tyrant's Wrath." The system's menacing eyes glowed crimson as it answered, "All right." The description unfolded. Tyrant's Wrath was an active skill. While active, all of the host's stats would skyrocket, crushing anyone foolish enough to face the tyrant head-on. But it required a high concentration of virus as a medium. Without it, the host's life force would be severely drained and control would likely be lost. The system warned, "Use with caution." The protagonist muttered to himself, "High concentration of virus, huh?" Straightening up, he decided aloud, "Looks like I really do need to check out that meteor crater." Right at that moment, his gaze sharpened as he noticed something approaching, armored vehicles rolling in. He observed a squad of men fully armed, equipped with weapons and gas masks, clearly troops or soldiers. One of them shouted, asking if Area A had been fully searched. Another confirmed it was all cleared. Watching them with narrowed eyes, the protagonist thought suspiciously, "What are troops doing here?" The scene shifted and showed the destroyed buildings of the city, chaos everywhere, with soldiers gathered around vehicles and tanks. One of the soldiers reported to Captain Gu, saying that all the civilians should have been sent to the gathering point, then asked if they should head back. He called out to the captain again, repeating her name. When Captain Gu finally turned around, it was revealed that she was a woman with bluish-purple hair, holding a massive firearm in her hand. She casually explained that she had just been thinking about something, then asked if all the civilians they could find in the southern district had already arrived at the power plant. She continued, saying their next move would be to advance toward the meteorite crater, and gave an order in her earpiece for all soldiers to stay alert. The soldier in front of her acknowledged the command with a quick, "Yes, understood." Captain Gu thought to herself, wondering if all civilians had really been evacuated. She muttered aloud, questioning what the strange sound she had just heard was. Turning to her soldiers, she asked if they also heard something that sounded like a motorcycle engine. One soldier replied with confusion, asking what kind of person would still be riding around on a bike in this situation. Another explained that all he could hear in his headset was the diesel engine of the armored vehicles. But right at that moment, Captain Gu heard something and instantly became alert, pointing her gun toward a direction. She announced that mutants were coming in large numbers, ordering her squad to prepare to engage at the 3 o'clock direction. Her soldiers were confused and turned toward where she commanded, some of them panicking as they questioned where to even engage. Another soldier reminded them to keep watch at 3 o'clock, but someone else argued that they didn't see anything at all. Another barked back, telling them to quit yapping, and right then mutants started swarming in from the 3 o'clock direction. The soldiers panicked as they realized the mutants were actually there. They shouted that it was time to engage. The armored vehicle turrets swiveled and blasted heavy attacks toward the swarm, the shots tearing through the mutants and blowing them apart. From above, the protagonist observed all of this and thought that the army had already started fighting, unleashing such fierce firepower. He figured these low-level mutants weren't much of a problem. The battle raged on with soldiers and armored vehicles wrecking the mutants. The protagonist reflected, remembering how in his previous life he had survived at first thanks to the army's temporary shelters, but those didn't last. Eventually, the army had disappeared and stopped caring about the city. He had never figured out what they went off to do. But just then, he noticed something different. Among the mutants was one with a single eye and shard-like yellow crystalline spikes sprouting from its back. He immediately recognized it and realized it was a minor mutant. He explained in his thoughts that these mutants had formed early after the meteorite impact. Their defining feature was the crystalline growths on their bodies, formed by staying near the crater, which resembled meteorite fragments. Normally, they stayed in groups within the craters to absorb energy, so he wondered why one would be wandering out alone. Even when alone, they were still extremely dangerous. Back in the past, he would have run as far as possible from such a creature. But now, with a smirk hidden beneath his hood, he welcomed the challenge. In the shadows, he grinned and muttered about someone delivering a pillow just as you're dozing off, clearly ready to end this mutant. Meanwhile, Captain Gu had also spotted the minor mutant and was shocked. The creature charged straight toward a soldier, who panicked and shouted that something different was coming their way. But before anyone could react, the minor mutant crushed an armored vehicle with terrifying force. Another soldier prepared an RPG, yelling that he'd handle the big guy and dared the mutant to try him. But in the next instant, the minor's claws struck and pierced him brutally. The other soldiers cried out his name in horror, Zio Luo. They were shaken by how fast the mutant was, but then crystalline fragments started spreading across Zio Luo's body. The minor then picked up Zio Luo's crystallized form and used him as a literal weapon, swinging him to attack Captain Gu. Captain Gu shielded herself with her gun, thinking in shock that the soldier had crystallized. But now defenseless as her gun dropped, she was left vulnerable. Her soldiers screamed her name in panic, but the mutant kept advancing. Captain Gu barely dodged with swift movements, flipping midair to evade the attack and landing to the side with a plan forming in her mind. The minor glared at her, and despite coughing, she faced it head-on. She grabbed the RPG that had been dropped by Zio Luo earlier during the chaos and blasted the minor mutant. As the attack landed, she shouted a reminder to take what Xiao Luo had just given them, revealing she had specifically gone for the weapon when she flipped aside. The miner staggered from the RPG blast, its body burning in fury. Captain Gu was amazed at first, thinking it was working, but the relief didn't last. Though the minor mutant had taken the damage, Bro started growing tentacles from the injured part of his body. Watching the grotesque regeneration, she wondered aloud if this monster was some kind of undead type. Right at that tense moment, she once again heard the faint roar of a motorcycle engine. She froze for a second, realizing that sound again. And then from above, their protagonist came flying in on his bike, landing right on top of the minor mutant. Captain Gu looked up at him, piecing it together in awe as she finished her thought. It really had been the sound of a motorcycle engine. We saw the protagonist burst onto the scene, rolling up on his bike like a badass ready to save the day. Without hesitation, he straight up crashed his bike into the minor mutant, a wild grin flashing across his face as if chaos itself fueled him. Then he revved his motorbike, riding circles around the massive creature, and in a blink, the minor mutant's head went flying. The protagonist landed hard, bike smoking, drifting with that menacing aura radiating off him like he was born for carnage. Right then, Captain Gu broke the silence with a sharp question. Was he even human? But the protagonist didn't bother answering, just locked eyes with her, cold and unreadable. In his head, he pieced it together. This was Captain Gu. How could she, of all people, almost get wiped out by a mere minor mutant? Before he could think too far, Captain Gu snapped orders to her squad, commanding them to lower their weapons. One soldier furiously demanded why this maniac was still riding his motorcycle in the middle of all this, calling him crazy. The protagonist just stared back, internally noting that Gu hadn't yet realized what an ability user was. Now that was interesting. His mind drifted back. In his last life, Captain Gu had been a respected ability user in the military's special squad, someone known to protect the ordinary folk. If the military hadn't suddenly dipped from the gathering zone, maybe he and Po Jun could have lived decently under her squad's protection. But he shook those thoughts off quickly. The fight wasn't over. Dismounting his bike, he told everyone, "We'll talk later," and squared up again because the supposedly dead minor mutant was twitching. Tentacles burst out of its beheaded body, even its severed head sprouting writhing limbs until the pieces latched back together. The soldiers freaked out, shouting that the minor mutant had regenerated. The protagonist charged forward, telling the beast to move aside while the soldiers panicked as the monster rushed them. One yelled out, "Is this kid insane?" Another barked that the creature had toppled armored vehicles, calling any hope nonsense. But then they all stopped to witness something insane. The protagonist had grabbed the minor mutant's head, blade flashing as his voice dropped grim. "I said move aside." Blue lightning crackled around him, his eyes glowing. In the next instant, he sliced the tentacles apart, shoved his arm deep into the writhing mess, and with a twisted grin muttered, "Found it." He ripped out the creature's crystal core as the minor mutant screamed in horror. He thought to himself that this was no ordinary core. It was highly concentrated, formed from dwelling too long in the meteor zone. Unlike other mutants, this one lived entirely off it, and only by ripping it out could it truly be killed. Normally, their hardened crystal shells made this hellish, but thanks to Captain Gu blasting it earlier, she had saved him the hassle. As the minor mutant withered, the protagonist pondered, how had it strayed so far from the meteor crater? Elegantly swinging and sheathing his blade, he noted its last dying growls. "Power is Lord's apostle." The revelation hit him, this thing could talk. The mutant crumbled into pieces, still muttering, "Apostle, apostle, apostle," before finally croaking out, "Apostle, search, come out and seek," found it, and then withering away completely. The protagonist stood in brief confusion before a system panel materialized. Hidden mission activated. Mission unknown. Content unknown. He scowled, thinking this only meant more trouble, everything unknown as always. The system teased him further, discovering his innate skill could unlock the next step. Innate skills? The hell does that even mean? He thought, scanning the panel. No time limit, no punishment, so he shrugged it off. He decided he'd been out long enough. As long as the skill didn't freak out on him, he'd head back soon. Another system prompt told him that the scattered crystals on the ground were meteor fragments worth collecting. Without hesitation, he opened the eerie mouth on his palm and swallowed up the glittering shards, scoffing to himself that the system didn't need to state the obvious. This stuff was valuable. Behind him, Captain Gu coughed, catching his attention. She stepped forward and addressed him formally, thanking him for saving her squad. She introduced herself as Captain Gu, leader of the city's second rescue squad, and politely asked for his name. But the protagonist thought better of it. Soon chaos would erupt as factions split territories. Best not to get dragged into that mess. Before he could respond, the heavy thrum of helicopter blades roared overhead, whipping the air around them. Soldiers gawked at the sky, asking if the aircraft were theirs. Captain Gu admitted she had no clue whose faction they belonged to. The protagonist, eyes narrowing, muttered that he had to go. Mounting his motorcycle, he guessed it had to be Chan Su-dong's men swaggering around. If so, the supermarket area was screwed. He needed to hurry back. Turning back briefly, he reminded Captain Gu and her squad that the helicopter noise would drive every mutant nearby berserk. He revved up, tossed a casual wave, and told them to be careful before tearing off into the distance. Captain Gu watched him vanish, whispering, "What a strange guy." A soldier hesitated, asking if they were really just letting him walk. Folding her arms and pushing her chest forward, Gu sighed with quiet certainty. She had a feeling their paths would cross again. Then she rallied her squad, reminding them they'd all heard what he said. "Prepare for battle," she ordered, and her soldiers agreed without hesitation. The scene shifted to helicopters slicing through the sky above the supermarket area that the protagonist had previously noted. Several helicopters had already landed near the supermarket, right where Chen Qingyue, Po Jun, and all the girls were inside the dungeon. A squad of men began moving from the helicopters toward the supermarket. A commanding voice echoed, ordering them sharply, saying, "You know the way, right?" Another order followed, stating that this was an important warehouse. These words came from none other than Zhao himself. Zhao then gave precise instructions to his men, demanding that all undamaged supplies must be recovered before entering the dungeon. He commanded them to kill all living things and to keep the lights bright. Soon Zhao's men marched into the dungeon. As they entered, murmurs passed between them. One man urged, "Let's go," but another stopped at the entrance, asking why they were hesitating. The second admitted that he felt a strange chill. Right then the reason became clear. Ice crystals suddenly materialized, chilling the air. In the next instant, sharp bursts of ice shards erupted from thin air, startling Zhao's men. Zhao's eyes narrowed as he muttered aloud in disbelief, questioning ice spikes. Then his tone turned anxious as he demanded to know why K423 had woken up. Chaos rippled through his squad. The men bolted, panicking at the sight of the ice spikes. Zhao snapped furiously, cursing them as useless trash and ordering them to fall back to the helicopters immediately. He shouted for Sang Bio, who appeared laughing from behind Zhao, mocking him by saying it was Zhao's turn to give orders, calling him garbage. Zhao sneered back, warning him not to act tough. He made it clear that if something went wrong with K423, none of them would be able to handle it. Around them, the infamous squad known as the Executioners stood, their presence heavy and intimidating. Sang Bio called out one of his members, Iron Fist, who emerged grumbling in a foul mood. Iron Fist complained bitterly, asking why he was always stuck with the troublesome jobs. Nearby, another executioner looked drunk, casually swigging from a bottle. Sang Bio barked at him to stop drinking and cover Iron Fist instead. The drunkard shrugged, scoffing that it was just one test subject, asking why everyone was so nervous. Another member, carrying a katana across his back, cut in sharply, warning that K423 wasn't like the other test subjects. He explained that no one even knew how she had woken up, but K423, the Ice Queen, was the most murderous, most violent, hardest to control subject of all. She had already destroyed several labs with 0 survivors, and rumors even claimed that other executioner squads hadn't been spared. The katana user visualized Chen Qingyue like a beast unleashed. He continued, reminding them that higher-ups had ordered Lord Chan Su-dong to secure a place to seal her away. Sang Bio, smirking, shifted the topic. He brought up the kid with spatial powers, the protagonist, and remarked that with those abilities, even surviving a grenade blast shouldn't have been hard. Zhao interjected, declaring that the protagonist must have woken up K423 while wandering around. He insisted the kid was definitely dead by now, too bad he wouldn't live long enough to experience Lord Chan Su-dong's methods. Zhao sneered that maybe the boy was lucky after all. Iron Fist then walked up to the wall of jagged ice spikes, staring at it with interest. He asked aloud if K423 had really killed other executioners, calling it interesting and mocking the others for looking so nervous. Gathering raw power in his right fist, he smashed through the ice spikes in one devastating blow, boasting that he wanted a real fight with the so-called Ice Queen. But suddenly a chilling voice echoed, "Enough." His fist began freezing over. From within the ice itself, Chen Qingyue, K423, the Ice Queen, emerged. Her menacing figure towered over them, her aura freezing Iron Fist's hands solid with just her presence. The executioners stiffened, instantly on guard. Tension spiked when Chen Qingyue declared in a cold, commanding tone that she had promised the protagonist she wouldn't cause him trouble. She warned them not to come near her again and stated firmly that she wasn't going back either. Her words stunned everyone. The katana wielder Sang Bio and Zhao were taken aback. The drunkard frowned, confused, muttering that this wasn't how she had been described at all, questioning if they had gotten the wrong person. Zhao himself was visibly shaken, blurting out in disbelief that she could actually talk. His thoughts spiraled as he realized what this meant. A test subject had regained her own consciousness. He instantly connected her mention of the protagonist to that annoying kid. Iron Fist, however, didn't care. He unfroze his fist with his powers, scoffing at the hesitation. He barked at the others, asking what they were waiting for before lunging forward with his fist raised high. Ignoring her warning, he shouted that he didn't give a damn about her nonsense and just wanted to smash her a few times. Chen Qingyue reacted swiftly, conjuring 2 massive ice spikes that snapped shut and trapped Iron Fist inside. Furious, Iron Fist yelled for backup, calling out to the drunkard. The drunkard didn't hesitate. He took another massive gulp from his bottle and mocked Iron Fist, saying he had been acting tough earlier only to chicken out so quickly. Then he exhaled the alcohol in one burning breath, unleashing a wave of fire straight at Chen Qingyue. Startled, she cursed internally at the sight of a fire ability user, but she conjured a towering wall of ice just in time to block the attack. Flames crashed against her frozen shield. The clash barely ended before the sharp sound of a katana being drawn sliced the air. The katana executioner Flying Shadow struck with blinding speed, cutting through her ice wall into shards. Moving past her, he announced coldly that her life would be claimed first by him. Chen Qingyue was stunned by his sheer speed, while Flying Shadow himself marveled that his blade had cut only her ice and not her. She had managed to block him in the blink of an eye. Flying Shadow admitted out loud that she lived up to her title as the Ice Queen. Then, raising his voice, he called on his companions, urging them to attack together. The executioners fanned out, surrounding Chen Qingyue. Iron Fist snapped back, scoffing at the idea of one-on-one fights, reminding everyone that their squad had never followed such traditions. But Flying Shadow frowned, his instincts gnawing at him. He confessed there was something strange. K423 felt like she had been suppressing her own power the whole time. Right at that moment, Iron Fist lunged at Chen Qingyue with a flying kick, but she blocked it with her ice powers. The ice shattered instantly from the impact, and while she was locked in the middle of that clash against the executioners, a voice started echoing in her head, begging to be let in, mocking her weakness. Chen Qingyue, however, didn't give a damn about that nagging voice. She reeled back her hand and unleashed a monstrous wall of jagged ice spikes. Iron Fist had to lunge backward to avoid getting skewered, while the drunkard in the squad called out to him and unleashed a torrent of fire from his mouth. Chen Qingyue blocked it with a wall of ice, but before she could breathe, Flying Shadow tried to sneak up from behind, katana in hand, declaring her death sentence. She spun instantly, facing him head-on, while inside her head that darker version of herself screamed again, "Let me take over." Her monstrous inner self echoed the same words on repeat like a broken record. But Chen Qingyue refused to give in and instead conjured a swirl of razor ice shards to deflect both the katana strike of Flying Shadow and Iron Fist's follow-up assault, screaming at them to get lost. Flying Shadow drifted back with a smug look, acknowledging her strength, calling her impressive and exactly what he'd expect from the infamous K423. He mused about finally seeing the kind of woman Lord Chang had been obsessed with. He shifted into his sword stance, taunting her with the question of how long she thought she could hold that defense, claiming it was already a dead end. The drunkard joined in, questioning her motives, asking if she really wanted to be their enemy. Iron Fist followed up with the same trash talk, trying to convince her to just come back with them because Lord Chang would take good care of her. But all that noise barely registered in her mind. She was busy wrestling her own inner demon, the other Chen Qingyue clawing inside her, screaming for dominance. That inner voice demanded blood, kill them all, sneering that she was useless and couldn't help the protagonist like this. It begged again and again to be let loose. Sweat poured down her face as horror gripped her, because deep down she wanted to kill them all so badly. Suppressing the other her was almost impossible now. She knew once she changed, only the protagonist could possibly stop her. Right then the scene shifted. The protagonist was out there, drifting his motorcycle like a total badass. Outside the supermarket, Zhao's men were hanging around, having their usual boring conversations. Suddenly he appeared, drifting straight through them, crashing his bike into the crowd and sending bodies flying. The rest of Zhao's men panicked, demanding to know who was there. One of them tried to calm the others, saying they should just shoot him. The protagonist grinned, admitting there were way too many of them and that it was annoying. He decided he'd have to blow all his stored electricity at once, lightning glittering across his hands like storm clouds ready to burst. But just as he was about to strike, a bomb flew in from nowhere and exploded in the middle of Zhao's men, blasting them apart. He noticed it instantly, only to see Po Jun stepping out of the smoke, gun in hand. Po Jun warned that Zhao had brought ability users to attack, while Chen Qingyue had gone to intercept them. He explained he had opened a back door through the casino hallway and told the protagonist to go that way. With a confident smirk, Po Jun promised to handle all the small fries outside himself. The protagonist called out his name, as if thanking him, and ran ahead, commanding Po Jun not to let a single one escape. Po Jun, in response, loaded his gun and simply said, "Understood." Inside, Chen Qingyue was still surrounded by the executioners, fighting tooth and nail. Flying Shadow sneered that her reputation was undeserved, claiming that if K423 was only this strong, he wouldn't have needed to even show up. Zhao and Sang Bio, the executioner's boss, stood on the sidelines watching everything unfold. Zhao sharp-eyed noticed something off. He muttered that although Chen Qingyue wasn't going full offense, she was still holding her ground against 3 executioners. Logically, if she really wanted to escape, there was no way they could have stopped her. He began to wonder, was she guarding something or was she waiting for someone? The drunkard, meanwhile, kept chugging alcohol until he was completely wasted. He slurred out that Brother Zhao had mentioned K423 having a little boyfriend. Maybe she was waiting for him to come save her, but then he mocked her, saying it was too bad. That reckless kid wouldn't understand anything. By now, he was probably hiding somewhere. He laughed, undermining the protagonist completely, telling Chen Qingyue she was all alone. Then, with fire swirling in his throat, he unleashed his ultimate flames, a blaze so hot it began melting her ice barriers like butter. Chen Qingyue realized instantly that the supermarket itself was heating up, making it harder to create ordinary ice. If this continued, the whole place would become a death trap. She had no choice left. Ice began creeping across her skin, her body transforming as her face twisted into something darker. With a chillingly evil smile, she prepared to declare that they had brought this fate on themselves. But before she could fully transform, a hand landed on her shoulder. It was the protagonist, moving her aside just in time and raising a shield to block the inferno head-on. Chen Qingyue's face flushed red. Her savior had arrived. And he didn't just block the fire. He pushed forward, ramming into the drunkard with brutal force. The shield crushed him, sending saliva and snot flying as the beads on his necklace shattered. The drunkard was launched across the battlefield, broken and stunned. The protagonist stood tall, sneering at the fool, calling him out for courting death, while the drunkard had no clue what had just hit him. The drunkard's face was smashed in as the heavy shield came crashing down, blood spurting violently from his nose while our protagonist stood over him, grinning like a menace after silencing that ugly fatty for good. In the next beat, the drunkard was nothing but a corpse pinned under the shield, his blood painting the scene in crimson spray, while the other two executioners just froze in place dumbstruck, not even registering what went down in that blink of a second. Their comrade was gone, crushed into paste, and they hadn't even twitched. At that exact moment, the protagonist turned toward them with a wicked grin stretching wide across his face. Zhao finally stepped up, transforming mid-motion, his ability sparking to life as he sneered. He threw shade, saying the brat wasn't dead after all and had the nerve to crawl back into the spotlight. Zhao mocked him harder, saying he looked pathetic but claimed he would recognize him even if he turned to ash. The protagonist, still dripping cocky energy, fired back in equal disrespect, calling him Zhao the Scarface and pointing out how this time Zhao had brought a whole squad of lackeys. He taunted that Zhao wouldn't be running with his tail between his legs again. Zhao's composure cracked, snapping as he demanded to know how the brat even knew that cursed name Scarface. Before Zhao could spiral further, Sang Bio cut in, his massive, muscle-stacked arm flexing as he ordered both of them to shut the hell up. Annoyed and simmering, he barked at the remaining two executioners, demanding what the hell they were standing around for and telling them to get the job done. He cursed about wasting resources on raising that drunkard only for him to get squashed so fast, calling him useless trash. In the next breath, the two surviving executioners closed the distance, bloodlust rising. Flying Shadow came swinging in with his katana, while Iron Fist already moved down bad, closing in near the protagonist. Sang Bio's voice boomed in their heads, threatening that if they didn't take him down, he'd make their suffering legendary when they got back. But the protagonist didn't even flinch at their oncoming assault. Instead, he casually glanced over at Chen Qingyue, dropping a sharp observation that she seemed like she was holding back. She told him it was fine and admitted she defigured something out earlier, explaining that the other her, the one lurking inside, had always been afraid of him. Flying Shadow wasn't having their bickering mid-battle, snapping that the two lovebirds really had time to flirt. That was his last mistake, because Chen Qingyue transformed instantly, eyes blazing, her death stare cutting deep. With her powers unlocked, she slapped Flying Shadow into oblivion with a vicious surge of ice power. In her transformed state, the hit came so fast and brutal that Flying Shadow didn't even process what just happened. His only thought was shock. Why was there suddenly such a monstrous pressure crushing down on him? The battle turned into chaos, Chen Qingyue conjuring an ice sword mid-motion and going full savage mode on the executioners. While she went off, Zhao used the chance to close in on the protagonist. His small hands mutated into massive stone fists as he charged in, grin twisted with mania, calling the protagonist a brat again before swinging. He accused him of still having the guts to show up, mocking whether K423 could protect him. But the protagonist met the strike head-on, his own fist colliding with Zhao's massive stone fist. Zhao's smirk died instantly when he realized it had no effect. His huge fist cracked like glass under the pressure and shattered apart. The protagonist mocked him straight to his face, asking what he thought now, and dropping the bomb that an executioner squad was never gonna be enough to beat them. Zhao barely had time to process before the protagonist punched him again, hard enough to make blood gush from Zhao's mouth. He was sent flying into a wall, stunned and disbelieving at how the protagonist's strength had skyrocketed in just 2 days. He couldn't wrap his head around how the brat had gotten so op. But the protagonist didn't stop there. In a blink, he dashed across the battlefield, closing in on Zhao again, ready to finish him off for good. At the last second, though, something shifted. His body suddenly felt unbearably heavy, like gravity itself had spiked against him. His thoughts burned in frustration. Why the hell did he suddenly feel like he was carrying a mountain on his back? That's when the answer hit him. From the side, Sang Bio intercepted with his ability, declaring it was enough. He claimed Scarface couldn't die, not unless he wanted Master Chang tearing him apart for it. Pinned in place by Sang Bio's crushing ability, the protagonist glared at him, asking if he finally decided to make a move after all that standing around. Sang Bio, amused, chuckled that he liked the tough act. He even tried to bargain, saying the drunkard was gone anyway and pitching the idea of the protagonist working for him, promising to put in a good word with Lord Chang. The protagonist, unbothered, thought to himself that Sang Bio was clearly a gravity user. But confusion gnawed at him. How come he had never heard of someone like this working for Chang in his past life? Instead of answering, he threw sarcasm back at Sang Bio, asking if he always recycled such boring-ass villain scripts, telling him to switch it up. Sang Bio didn't like that. He pressed down harder, the ground beneath the protagonist cracking apart under the weight. Sang Bio mocked that he could take all the time he wanted to think over the offer before he crushed every last one of his bones. The scene then shifted outside, where Po Jun's own rampage had already ended. Zhao's men were sprawled all over the ground, unconscious or worse, while Po Jun stood tall, having mowed through every last one of them. He reloaded his gun with a bitter scoff, muttering to himself that he was pathetic, feeling rusty, taking hits from thugs who could barely hold their weapons right. But then something trippy caught his eye. A wound on his hand was smoking, and in the next moment it began closing up. Within seconds it was gone, like it had never existed. Shock rippled through him as he realized every wound across his body was doing the same, healing up with smoke curling off them like some freak-show regeneration hack. He stared at himself, wide-eyed, demanding an answer to the question burning in his head: how the hell were his wounds healing like this? All the chaos and raging battle above shook the ground where the protagonist and the squad of executioners clashed. Underneath in the dungeon, all the girls could hear the fighting above and feel the tremors seeping down through the walls. They whispered among themselves, realizing that Brother Po Jun and Chen Qingyue had been up there for quite a while now. One of them immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios, but another girl quickly tried to calm her down, insisting they shouldn't talk like that. She reminded everyone that they were strong and would be fine. Still, the first girl confessed how terrified she was and muttered if they were going to be taken back and experimented on again. Among the group, one girl wearing a cap rolled her eyes and snapped back, calling the whole worrying thing annoying. She said there was no way she was going back to that hell and swore that if anyone tried to take her, she'd rather die first. She brushed it off as too early to freak out over something like this, as long as the protagonist made it back alive. Meanwhile, above, the protagonist was struggling hard. Sang Bio's gravity ability was crushing down on him, forcing him to his knees, completely pinned and surrendered to the pressure. Chen Qingyue watched this unfold, her face tightening with concern, but she didn't get the luxury of staying worried. Out of nowhere, Flying Shadow lunged at her from behind, demanding a proper fight and mocking her for worrying about her lover. But Chen Qingyue wasn't here for that, as she whipped out the ice blade she'd conjured, and in a split second her sword collided with Flying Shadow's katana. The result was brutal. The katana was sliced through like butter, fragments of it spinning into the air. Chen Qingyue wore a smug look and made it clear that worrying about the protagonist was ridiculous. Flying Shadow was visibly rattled at how easily her weapon got destroyed. Chen Qingyue then straight up boasted, declaring that they had no damn clue what kind of monster they'd just pissed off, slashing toward Flying Shadow in pure confidence. But her strike only hit an afterimage. Flying Shadow was already behind her. Chen Qingyue's expression shifted from smug to impressed, acknowledging how fast her opponent was. She admitted Flying Shadow's speed was insane. The Flying Shadow laughed lightly, throwing a cocky line about how even if Chen Qingyue could block her attacks, she'd never be able to keep up with her speed. But sweat betrayed her cool front, because Chen Qingyue hadn't just slashed empty air, she had actually sliced through her mask. With a deadly glare, Chen Qingyue threw the question right back, mocking the idea that she couldn't keep up. She unleashed her ice power and summoned multiple spikes that burst forward like frozen fangs, stabbing Flying Shadow all over her body in a blink. Flying Shadow froze, completely stunned, gasping out where the hell those spikes came from as they pierced through her. But just as fast as the spikes impaled her, a massive fist crashed in and shattered them to pieces. It was none other than Iron Fist, arriving like a walking tank. In the background, Flying Shadow clutched her face, probably because the ice spikes had wrecked it. Iron Fist boomed through the chaos, reminding everyone that he was still part of this damn fight. He stepped forward, flexing his presence, and Chen Qingyue braced herself with icy determination. Iron Fist lunged and threw a punch at her, but she threw up an ice wall just in time to block it. Meanwhile, the protagonist, gritting through Sang Bio's oppressive gravity, slowly pushed himself back up. But something about Chen Qingyue was off. He could feel it. She should have been able to end this already. It made him question if she was holding back or if she was genuinely weaker than that mad woman buried somewhere inside her. That moment of distracted curiosity cost him. A leg came flying at his face and slammed into him. It was Zhao who barked at him to stop pretending, questioning who the hell he was looking at and reminding him that K423 was Master Chang's property. Zhao told him to stop daydreaming like some rookie. The kick wasn't just for show either. A bruise spread across the protagonist's face, throbbing from the impact, but he wasn't about to take that lying down. His face darkened with pure rage, and in the next heartbeat he swung a punch at Zhao with brutal force. The hit landed like a truck, and all the nasty fluids, snot, spit, everything went flying off Zhao's face in a disgusting splatter. The protagonist didn't stop there either. With a cold, dark warning, he made it clear that Zhao shouldn't ever get cocky with him again. In the background, Sang Bio stood frozen, visibly puzzled, his gaze locked on Zhao's blanked-out state. The confusion didn't last long before the fear kicked in, making him damn near shit his pants. With that shaky energy, he hesitantly questioned how the hell the protagonist was still able to move like that. He knew damn well they were standing under multiple times the normal gravity, Yet the protagonist looked like he was chilling in regular weather, completely unfazed. The protagonist turned toward Sang Bio with that casual menace in his expression, as if the guy's panic was mildly entertaining. He mocked Sang Bio, repeating his words about multiple times gravity and asking if the man even understood what the F he was talking about. And then, just like that, he called out to the monstrous mouth. A mouth with blood-red eyes manifested on the protagonist's right palm. With a twisted glint in his eyes, he said that this low-energy gravity pressing evenly across his entire body was just too damn delicious. Using that palm mouth, he was absorbing the gravity pressure straight into his own energy core. He'd just been putting on an act this whole time, pretending to be subdued because absorption took time. A sharp system notification cut through the tension, reporting energy absorption at 91%. That meant he had basically swallowed all the force Sang Bio had been pumping out. Grinning like a devil who just found a loophole in hell, he taunted Sang Bio, questioning if that was really all he had. Sang Bio, now more intrigued than shaken, lifted his hand and began gathering some kind of power. He admitted that Zhao wasn't lying when he said the protagonist's ability was strange. He smirked at how interesting it was, and then in the very next heartbeat he punched the absolute shit out of the ground, shouting his challenge like some Saturday morning villain. Veins bulged across his arm as it slammed into the earth, the ground fracturing and crackling under the sheer force of it. Outside, debris began to rain down, and Po Jun immediately noticed the sudden chaos. He demanded to know what the hell was going on, while inside, Iron Fist calmly stated that it was gravity turbulence. He also threw in a half-annoyed comment at Sang Bio, wondering if maybe, just maybe, their boss could have given a damn heads up before pulling this stunt. Chen Qingyue felt her body being weighed down as the attack's range expanded monstrously, her thoughts laced with disbelief at its scale. Zhao meanwhile screamed at Sang Bio to wait for him to get out first. Bro was straight up a coward. Sang Bio glowed with blazing purple energy, his eyes burning like a supernova as gravity condensed in his palm. He declared that this was his ability to control gravity itself. He promised the protagonist had no one to blame but himself for pissing him off and warned him to just wait until he got crushed. But the protagonist clearly wasn't buying into the whole boss-villain monologue. In the next second, he simply kicked Sang Bio in the face. Sang Bio didn't even process what the hell just happened. The protagonist, with a menacing calm, told him to shut the hell up, completely uninterested in his little ability resume like he was announcing something important. But Sang Bio grinned mid-face kick, warning that gravity turbulence wasn't just about crushing people. The protagonist's brows twitched as he realized too late that he'd walked straight into a trap. Sang Bio mocked him, pointing out how badly he underestimated him. The protagonist was suddenly suspended midair. 2 sharp scratches ripped across his face, blood trickling down. In the next second, it felt like a storm of invisible blades carved through him, sharp cuts slashing all over his body. Gravity turbulence slammed him back down, crushing him under a weight that wanted to break bones and tear organs. Sang Bio explained his trick with a sinister satisfaction, saying that within his range, the gravity field fractured into countless microcurrents. Even if the protagonist's muscles held up, his internal organs wouldn't survive the rapid shifts. In the background, Zhao cursed Sang Bio to stay the F away from him. Sang Bio kept going, smug as ever, asking if it made sense now. He even suggested the protagonist just hand over K423. Under that brutal pressure, the protagonist's mind clicked. Something about this ability, it felt familiar as hell. Then the memory hit like a train from his past lives. This was the ability of the infamous East District Lord-class mutant, the Pig Face. No wonder he'd never heard of Sang Bio in his last life with Master Chang. Dude must have turned mutant. From the moment Pig Face showed up in history, he was a walking time bomb, bound to lose control sooner or later. Despite the crushing force, the protagonist rose back to his feet, smirking with grim realization. He admitted to himself that he'd misunderstood. Sang Bio wasn't holding back to flex, he wasn't attacking properly because he didn't dare to. Sang Bio's eyes widened in shock at that statement. He panicked, demanding how the hell the protagonist knew that, trying to dismiss it as nonsense. But the protagonist didn't stop. He asked if Chang Su Dong knew. A man like that would never keep a piece of garbage like Sang Bio around. Then he told him to take off the hood and show everyone if he really believed his mutation was still under control. As his hood slipped back just enough, multiple red pupils glared through, proof that Sang Bio's mutation was already accelerating like wildfire. Sweat dripped down his temples, his teeth clenched so hard it was audible. His secret was out. Rage exploded out of him as he screamed at the protagonist to shut up. He called himself the Chosen One, the future of humanity. He shouted in pure denial, claiming a godly ability like his could never cause mutation. Then in a gut-punching turn, he started crying like a kid being dragged back into hell, sobbing that he didn't want to go back to the lab. He vowed to crush the protagonist right there and then. Using gravity, he hurled every piece of debris in the area toward him like an avalanche of death. The protagonist, locking in, decided playtime was over. As he braced himself, a flicker of thought crossed his mind. He didn't know how Sang Bio ended up in the East District in this timeline. In his last life, he'd spent years being hyper-cautious, studying every mutant like a damn nerd just to stay alive. He always hid in settlements, clinging to protection from ability users, never daring to wander into the big leagues. He never once crossed paths with any high-level mutant, let alone a regional lord-class freak like Pigface. And now, of all moments, he was face-to-face with one. While the protagonist was still lost in his own thoughts, his body fully shifted into its monstrous form, radiating the raw, suffocating aura of a true mutant. He clamped his hand around Sangbao's neck, lifting him high with an effortless grip, and coldly declared that he wasn't interested in what had happened to him after. It would be easier to just kill him early and save everyone a whole lot of trouble, he figured. That way the East District would actually turn into a much more peaceful place, and honestly, that sounded like some damn good news. Right at that moment, a system notification popped up like a jump scare. The system reported detecting a response from a Quasi-Lord mutant. The main mission had been updated. His new task was to defeat the Quasi-Lord level mutant that was about to appear, and the reward, several body enhancement points plus a random skill enhancement, flashed on the interface like some annoying game quest. He cursed internally at how the system loved to mess with him again, unimpressed by the measly reward. He questioned if he should just keep Sangbao locked up for a bit until he fully turned into a mutant. The system shot that down immediately, stating there was no need because the mutation had already begun on its own. And right then smoke started pouring out of Sangbao's body, his eyes went blank, and his teeth elongated into something far more monstrous. The protagonist, still gripping him tightly, simply muttered to himself that fine, he wouldn't argue with the damn system. The guy was going to die anyway, so he might as well squeeze out some extra reward from it. From above, Iron Fist had a front row seat to the entire freak show. He stared down at his boss, confusion twisting across his face, wondering what the hell was up with Sangbao and what was wrong with that kid down there. But before he could process it more, Chen Qingyue snapped him out of it, asking if it was suddenly his turn to just stand around and stare. A blade suddenly sliced the air from behind as Flying Shadow made her move, her voice sharp as she called out to Chen Qingyue, reminding her that her opponent was right here. From the earlier clash with the ice spikes, Flying Shadow's mask had already cracked off, revealing a woman's face with a scar slashed across the right side, when she usually kept hidden under her bangs. With a twisted grin, she spat venom at Chen Qingyue, calling her an uncontrollable psycho who only got favored by the higher-ups because of her powerful nature-type ability. She sneered that thanks to Chen, they had all suffered, and then making a disgusted expression, she bragged that if she managed to kill her, every bit of resource and treatment Chen Qingyue once had would be hers. And Master Chang would definitely look favorably on her for that. Chen Qingyue just absorbed all of it, quiet but deadly, then tilted her head slightly and questioned if Flying Shadow was just another victim, just like the other girls in the dungeon. Meanwhile, Iron Fist finally jumped down, yelling out to his boss Sangbao, claiming he was here to help. The protagonist caught sight of this clown showing up unimpressed, but Sangbao was clearly on a completely different wavelength now. Lost deep in the mutation spiral, Sangbao snarled at Iron Fist, demanding to know if he was here to mock him too. Then with zero hesitation, he grabbed Iron Fist, jaws splitting wider than they should, and hissed if Iron Fist wanted to kill him and take his place. His body ballooned to monstrous proportions, and the next second he chomped down on Iron Fist, biting his head clean off with a sickening crunch. He growled out a warning between blood-slicked teeth, fully consumed by the mutation. The protagonist stared at the escalating mess, realizing the guy had gone completely feral. Zhao, watching this, broke out into a full sweat, panic written all over his face. As Sangbao kept growing, gnawing on Iron Fist's corpse like a savage beast, Zhao's nerves cracked. His brain screamed that this was not good and he needed to bolt. Internally, he questioned if those sketchy drugs from that shady organization still had these kinds of side effects even after awakening. He decided he had to run and tell Master Chang immediately, but the universe clearly wasn't on his side. The moment he spun around to make a break for it, he slammed into someone, and there stood Po Jun radiating menace like John Wick on a bad day. His cold eyes locked on Zhao and he mocked him, asking if only now he was deciding to run. A little late, wasn't it? This wasn't like the usual Zhao. Zhao froze, terrified, choking out Po Jun's name in pure horror.